Going to go ahead and call this August 5th, 2019 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for coming this evening. I see Nancy out there, and I was going to ask if you would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please, this evening. Or Jan. Thanks very much. We'll move on to item 3 of our agenda, which is communications from the public. If you are here to speak on any of the 3 public hearings we have this evening, please wait until I call those specific hearings and we will take public comment at that time. But if there's anything you'd like to share with the council unrelated, now would be your opportunity, and your name and address for the record, please, when you approach the podium. Any public comment tonight? Jen.
Jan Metzmaker, 915 Dakota, Mayor Mulfeld, Council. I had a couple questions about the quarry development on Wisconsin. The bike path has been torn up for quite a while and it's been pretty dangerous. I see they're finally asphalting part of it, but is there any regulation that once you've torn up a public venue that needs to be taken care of? Because it's been pretty dangerous trying to ride your bike on that. And the other question I have about the quarry is there's an awful lot of dirt on that site that with nothing on it, and on windy days you can see the dirt just billowing off that site. And I know with most of the conditions of approval with developments, it usually says that you have to abate and control fugitive dust. And I'm wondering, the west side of that project is just a big pile of dirt, which is near my house. And do they have to do anything to abate the fugitive dust on there? And lastly, when I came before council when this was approved, I asked that weeds be considered as one of the conditions of approval because that site is really weedy. And I was told, no, that will be handled in the complaint process. Well, I've complained and the weeds are blooming and there's a lot of knapweed there and nothing has been done about it. And I've complained weeks and weeks ago about this. So I'm not sure how you get someone to work on that. So the other question I have, since I'm chair of the weed committee, is there any way that we can tighten up the weed ordinance? Because there seems to be some problem with the definition of eradicate. And under the law that we have, it says that to use steps as are necessary, including but not limited to mowing, pulling, and applying herbicide, and those are considered eradication. But mowing and pulling things like knapweed or leafy spurge do not work. So Major Robinson sends a letter, takes a couple weeks, they may mow it, a couple weeks later all the weeds are back, another letter. So we're not dealing with the problem with the eradication. I'm not sure legally how you can get it to actually eradicate because the methods that it says eradicate weeds do not work, and I know you know that they don't work. So can we change that in the rules that we have for the weeds? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jan. Who's next?
My name is Kurt Vomfell, 427 East Center Street, Kalispell. I'm here as the owner's representative for agenda item number 7, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have now or later.
We'll take questions when we call that item. Are you planning to stick around, yes. I assume?
Yes.
So yeah, if we have questions, we'll certainly call you back up to the podium. And thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
To address that item. Thanks. Further public comment tonight? Mariah.
Mariah Jose, 711 Park, and good evening. So I'm here on behalf of Nelson Real Estate Holdings, which is my family's company that owns the site for the new Nelson Hardware. And I'd like to thank the council for advocating the TIF funds that were used to demolish the existing building that was there, as well as revitalize that area with a lot of the landscaping that we did for our new building. And with your help, we've been able to create a beautiful site that is on the interest of Whitefish, and we really appreciate how the city partnered with us in making our new store a reality. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. You don't need anything.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mariah. I really appreciate that. It looks great out there. Thanks. Dick?
Dick Zollner, 1365 Warman Road. I don't have a dog in a fight on this, but I just want to say there's a certain lady that's having a problem with the council, I guess, and I don't need to mention names, but that lady was a great asset during the period when the county and the city was fighting. Had a lot of information. I don't think there's anybody that ever gets up to talk to council that ever gets more information in the background than this lady does. So I would just say if you guys can get with this lady, I think, figure it out. And when I first started coming to meetings, I was told I couldn't come to a meeting. My neighbor had asked me to go with her, and they wouldn't let me in a meeting. It was a closed-door meeting, and it was a weird feeling. And so if somebody feels that way, even if it's perceived, I understand why they get mad. And so I think this lady we all know her, and I hope it doesn't have to go to some kind of a judgment and run everybody through the ringer. But I'm just here to say I think she's one of the few that ever comes to council that researches so much. And if she needs that time to research it, I think she deserves it. So that's all I got to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Dick. Appreciate the comments.
Hi, my name is Lana Elliott Scott, and I live on 309 Iowa Avenue. And I've been concerned about the light at the bottom of the viaduct, which is on Wisconsin and Edgewood. And I would hope something is done with the left-hand turn signal so boats and trailers will be able to turn to go towards City Beach. I've been stuck up on top, not being able to move forward for at least 5 lights, because not a boat or trailer can even turn until the light turns red, because there's so much traffic coming the opposite direction. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Further comment tonight from the public on any item? Not seeing any. We'll stay with the audience. Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Jan, sorry. Didn't see you get up there.
This is from the Weed Committee. On other city projects where we've done street projects, the contractor is supposed to put down dirt that doesn't have weeds on it. And a friend of mine on Summers is very upset that the cheatgrass there is horrible that came in with the dirt on the Summers Street project. And she said that she was told there's a plan, but nobody's told her what the plan is. And cheatgrass is a horrible thing to have out anywhere. And I hope the city can figure out a way to get rid of that for those folks, because they're not very happy with that. The street looks great, but the boulevards are a mess.
Yep. Thanks, Jan. Any other board reports from the audience? How about the council? Not seeing any. We do have item 5, which is our consent agenda. Any changes or additions to the July 15th meeting minutes, or can I have a motion for approval? Richard.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Fury. Further comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously. Michelle, which brings us quickly on to our 3 public hearings this evening. We'll start with item 6A, which is a consideration of a request from Ian Griffiths for a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment located at 224 West 8th Street. The property is zoned WR2, which is our 2-family residential district. Bailey.
Hey, good evening. The applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to construct an accessory apartment behind an existing single-family residence. The accessory apartment will be located above a proposed 2-car garage at the rear of the property. The building will meet all setback size and height requirements and will access off the alley on the north side of the property. And there is an existing garage currently there that will be removed as part of this project. So the subject property is approximately 10,000 square feet. It's surrounded by residential uses on all sides. It's zone WR2, which is our two-family limited residential district. And the growth policy designation for this area is urban, which does correspond to the WR2 zoning. It'll be connected to all city services and utilities. We did mail a notice to adjacent landowners within 150 feet of the property on June 26th. We also emailed advisory agencies and placed a legal in the Whitefish pilot on July 3rd. I've had no comments submitted on the project. So just to hit the highlights, we review the project based on the criteria for evaluation of a conditional use permit in our zoning. I'm just going to hit the highlights of them. The proposal is consistent with the purpose and intent of the regulations. There are special performance standards for accessory apartments, and this project does appear to meet all of those requirements. The apartment will meet or exceed the setbacks required for an accessory structure, and those will be confirmed at the time of a building permit. And the subject property does comply with both the minimum lot size and lot width requirements of the WR2 zoning. As I mentioned, the apartment and the new garage will access from a public alley that's on the north side of the property, which accesses West 8th Street from an additional alley on the east side of the property as well. Both of these, the West 8th Street and the alleys, are publicly maintained roadways, and so there is adequate access to the property for the project. The zoning regulations requires 2 parking spaces for a single-family dwelling and 1 additional off-street parking space for the accessory apartment. The proposed lot does provide adequate space to accommodate all parking needs on site within the spaces located within the proposed garage, and there is additional room adjacent to the existing dwelling area that is shown on their site plan as well. Any new driveways or parking areas are required to be paved under our current regulations. The property is currently served by municipal water and sewer service would be required for the accessory apartment, and that would be reviewed at the time of building permit by the Public Works Department. Stormwater drainage will also be reviewed by the Public Works Department at the time of building permit application has been submitted as well. Traffic impacts are anticipated to be minimal since the property does have an existing single-family residence and it's located within an existing neighborhood with similar uses. It will meet the lot coverage and height standards, and again, that will be confirmed at the time of building permit. In order to meet the reduced setbacks for the accessory structure, the proposed garage must be completely detached from the existing single-family residence, and that will reduce the bulk and mass of the proposed development as well. And let's see. The proposed use is not expected to impact or change the character of the existing neighborhood. It will be similar to structures already constructed within that area, and the density is not out of character with this neighborhood. So staff recommended approval of the conditional use application subject to 11 conditions. The planning board met on July 18th and considered the request. There were no members of the public other than the applicant that spoke at the meeting. And I did attach the minutes, draft minutes, as part of your packet as well. Following the hearing, the planning board did unanimously approve the request with the findings of fact and recommended conditions. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey on her staff report? Any questions? Frank?
Bailey, just to confirm, this facility cannot be used for short-term rentals?
Correct. And actually, I did add that it's like condition number 10, just as a precaution.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Further questions from the council? Not seeing any. Thanks, Bailey. We did advertise for a public hearing on item 6A, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Is the applicant or the applicant's representative here tonight, and do you have anything to share with the council? General public comments? Any public testimony on this item? Any public comments? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for discussion or a motion. Andy.
I would move to approve WCUP 19-11, the findings, fact, and staff report, 11 conditions as transmitted to us by our Whitefish Planning Board from their July 18, 2019 meeting.
I second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously as well. Michelle. Thanks, Bailey. We'll move on to item 6B of our agenda, which is consideration of a request from Theodora and William Walton Irrevocable Trust for a conditional use permit to construct a guest house located at 2162 Houston Drive. The property zone WSR, which is our suburban residential district. Bailey.
Me again. Give me twice in a row. So the applicant is requesting a conditional use permit to construct a guest house on the subject property. It is currently developed with a single-family dwelling. The guest house would have a footprint of approximately 1,200 square feet in size, with the total floor area greater as it will be a two-story structure. It will comply with all setback requirements in addition to building height and lot coverage. And it is accessed from Houston Drive, which is a publicly maintained road. So the subject property is approximately 2.2 acres in size. It is, as I said, currently developed with a single-family residence. It's surrounded by residential uses other than the west side, which has Whitefish Lake. It is zone WSR, which is our suburban residential district, and the growth policy designation for this area is suburban residential, which does correspond to the WSR zoning. We did mail a notice to adjacent landowners within 150 feet of the parcel on June 26th. We also emailed advisory agencies, placed the legal in the paper on July 3rd. I had 2 comments that had been received regarding the existing septic system, and those were included as part of the packet as well. So just hitting the highlights of the criteria for consideration of conditional use permit. Again, the proposal is consistent with the purpose intent of the regulations. Again, there are performance standards in the zoning regulations for guest houses, and this project does appear to meet all those requirements. The standards do state that a guest house may not be rented, or no rent may be charged or received, other than for used in compensation with a domestic worker and the owners as part of a contract or an agreement for that. The new structure must meet the setbacks required for the primary structure, since the footprint will be greater than 600 square feet in size. And the existing driveway is currently paved, but any new driveway or parking areas will also require the first 80 feet to be paved as well. Again, the property does comply with both the minimum lot size and lot width requirements for the WSR zoning. There are 2 accessory structures already located on the property. There's a boathouse located near Whitefish Lake and a detached 2-story garage, and both of those were constructed prior to the property being annexed into Whitefish city limits. The zoning regulations requires 2 parking spaces for the single-family dwelling, and 2 off-street spaces must be provided for the guest house, since the total floor area is greater than 1,200 square feet, since it's the 2-story. And the lot does appear to provide adequate space to accommodate all parking needs on site within the property. The property is served by a private septic system reviewed by the Flathead County Environmental Health Department, and water service is pulled from Whitefish Lake. There's not public water or sewer along this portion of Houston Drive. It ends at the corner, and this is at the very northern point of that. Stormwater will be reviewed by the Public Works Department at the time application for building permit was submitted, and it was reviewed with the residential house that was submitted as well. Traffic impacts are anticipated to be minimal, since the property already includes a single-family residence located within an existing neighborhood with similar uses. The guest house must meet the lot coverage and height standards of the zoning, and again, that will be confirmed at the time of building permit. It will be located in a detached accessory building between the main house and the public roadway. There is no limit on total floor area for a guest house, but the size must be accessory to a single-family dwelling that's on the property, and that generally reduces their overall mass and scale of the building, just because they have to be smaller by nature. As I said, they must comply with the primary structure setback, since it's over 600 square feet, and this will allow for adequate open space within the subject property to maintain the character of that neighborhood. So staff recommended approval of the conditional use permit, subject to 8 conditions. The planning board met on July 18th and considered the request. No members of the public spoke at the meeting, but the applicant was present, and those minutes are attached for your review as well. The planning board unanimously approved the request with one additional condition, and that condition was condition 9, inspection of the boathouse and the existing garage must be completed by city staff to confirm the absence of cooking facilities prior to a building permit. And I actually just wanted to note, I did go out on site today, this morning, with the applicant's representative and looked at both the boathouse and the garage, and there were no cooking facilities present in either one. And I did take pictures and took Major, our code enforcement officer, with me as well as second eyes. And then the other item that was mentioned at planning board was about the possible sprinkling of the structure. And I did talk with Travis, the fire marshal, and he stated at this time he would not require sprinkling, but obviously during building permit, once he gets to look at the actual building plans, that would be something he could look at then as well. So, but at this time, he wasn't requiring any condition. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have as well.
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey on her staff reports or the application? Any questions? Richard?
Going back to the planning board, does the existing system, septic system, need to be expanded to accommodate this guest house?
I will let the applicant address that. He is here, Travis is here tonight to answer that question. Because that's reviewed by the Flathead County Environmental Health. I have no experience with any of that stuff, so.
Okay.
Any additional questions? Not seeing any. Thanks, Bailey. We did advertise for a public hearing on item 6B of our agenda. I do see that Travis is here with us tonight. Anything to add, Travis, to the staff report? Thanks. Public comment, public testimony? Any public comment on this item? I do have two folks that apparently did sign up, Mark and Tamara. Did you wish to comment on this application? No. Okay. Okay, thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for discussion or a motion. Frank?
Mr. Mayor, Bailey, could you get us an answer on the septic issue? I mean, that's a concern.
I mean, as far as, from what I can tell you, the septic system has to be reviewed by environmental health for any expansion or just to be able to build if it adequately can handle that. It's kind of outside of the city's realm. It's, it's their regulations, their code of what they require. Obviously, if they can't get an approved septic system or reevaluated it, then obviously then they dock to us. But I don't know what the current size is. I mean, it's something that's outside of my realm of review, so.
Richard?
My question is the same one I had at the planning board, and that is the distance and the cost of extending the sewer to the property versus the cost of expanding the septic system. And at the planning board, the comment was, well, it's just a lot more. Well, now's the time to find out how much a lot is. And is it $1,000? Is it $10,000? And given what we know and what we are endeavoring to do along the lakeshore, it seems to me that we should take, and the owners should take every opportunity to hook up to the city's sewer system in order to protect water quality in Whitefish Lake. And so I think that there's a major unanswered question here as to lake protection, even though the county and at planning board hasn't been inspected for 2 years. So at the time it was put in. So to me, that's a major issue and a major question that remains unanswered. Thanks, Bailey.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, from my understanding is, and you can definitely ask Craig, I prepped him for this question, so I'm sure he's dying to answer or say something. But from my understanding is, unless Flathead County denies their permit, we cannot require them to extend services. So that's my understanding.
That's correct. I'll acknowledge Craig.
I don't know if I'd say dying to answer the question, but I'm happy to add some input here. So the county's procedure, what they'll typically do is a fixture count on the remodel or the new structure. And if they have record drawings on the septic, they can then determine whether or not that septic system is adequate to serve the additional facilities in the home. If it's not, they'll do an analysis, and if city sewer is within 200 feet of the property, they will more likely than not require that property to hook up to sewer. If the property owner can do a financial evaluation and prove that it costs more than 3 times or 300% the cost of the septic improvements, then they will allow the septic improvements if the soils are suitable and they have space to do it. So it's really kind of that 200-foot plus 300% rule. If it costs less than 3 times what it costs to do the septic, then they will have to tie into sewer if it's within 200 feet of the property. But it's not something that's determined until there's actual, fixture units and building permit applications for the project.
John, follow-up.
Frank?
Craig, is this property within 200 feet of the sewer?
Yeah, I believe it is.
Okay, thank you.
Bailey?
It's not within 200.
didn't
It's
think
like
so.
500 or something like that. So just making that note.
Sorry, Bailey, is that from the actual proposed structure or from the lot line? It is from the lot line? Okay, I stand corrected. Apparently it's not.
Richard?
Just would note that according to the diagram, there's an additional 4 bathrooms planned. That's a lot of bathrooms, plus all the other facilities that go with it. So, I just think we've got to get a handle on.
I couldn't disagree with, or I couldn't agree with you more, Richard, in principle, but the fact of the matter is that this is outside of our jurisdiction, and it's in Flathead County's hands. As much as we'd like to see these applications come forward and the homeowners to do the right thing by sewering their properties, unfortunately, in every case, we don't get that luxury, and it's unfortunate. I agree with you, given the plethora of information that we've collected and the Lake Institute's proven regarding septic leachate. But regardless of that, it's really outside of our purview as a governing body here in Whitefish. We just hope that the county will do the right thing when they do their analysis. With that said, to move this along, I'd prefer to have a motion on the table, and then we can debate the motion. Katie?
I move to approve WCUP 19-9, the findings of fact and the staff report and the 9 conditions of approval as recommended by the Whitefish Planning Board, July 18th, 2019.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hartman. Further discussion on the motion? Richard?
Sure, I'll step out and say I'm opposed to it, just for the question of sewering, and that I would hope that the owner would do the right thing, and my no vote will be an attempt to encourage the owner/developer to do the right thing.
Thank you, Richard. Further comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry on a 4-2 vote with Councilors Sweeney and Hildner voting in opposition. Thanks, Bailey. And we will move on to item 6C of the agenda, which I imagine is why many of you are here tonight. It's item 6C, which is consideration of a request from 519 Skiles Place LLC for a conditional use permit to construct 54 apartments located in 2 buildings at 519 Skiles Place. The property is zoned WR4, which is our high-density multifamily residential district. Wendy.
Okay, good evening. So again, this is a conditional use permit request to develop 54 apartments in 2 buildings. The applicant is proposing 24 units in the north building and 30 units in the south building. Access to this site is off of Skiles Place at the northwest corner of the property, and parking is located in the center of the project. Open space areas are located around the perimeter of the project. 3 existing homes and commercial buildings, which includes an auto repair business and storage buildings, will be removed as part of this project. A conditional use permit is required because there's more than one principal use proposed for this lot. Just some background information. I'm sure you folks will recall adopting the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan back in April 2018. And these 4 parcels are part of that plan and were redesignated from urban and neighborhood commercial to high-density residential in order to facilitate redevelopment of the property and better align the zoning with the land use designation. And then last fall, as part of the implementation of the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan, the City Council approved a request to rezone portions of this property from WB1, which is a commercial district, to WR4 in order to facilitate the multifamily development and be congruent with the high-density residential land use designation. The property is located at 519, 523, and 525 Skiles Place and is a little more than 1.5 acres. The zoning is WR4, High Density Multifamily Residential District. It is surrounded by residential and commercial uses, and again has that high density residential growth policy designation. It's served by all public services and facilities. We noticed adjacent landowners and advisory agencies and placed a legal in the pilot. We received 11 letters to date. You have a few of them up there. Folks are concerned about increased traffic, increased congestion on Wisconsin Avenue, the lack of a green arrow left-hand turn lane at Edgewood, pedestrian bicycle safety on Wisconsin Avenue, density, changing the neighborhood character and the height of the buildings. Also, traffic calming on Iowa is a concern. Noise, outdoor lighting, and an adequate landscaping buffer. Like the 2 previous permits that you just reviewed, we reviewed these according to the criteria in the conditional use permit zoning regulations. This is compliant with the growth policy, and it is high-density residential, which is consistent with the WR4, and is also implementing the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan. Previously, the zoning and land use designation simply mirrored the industrial type uses that were occurring on this property, including the vehicle, boat storage, and auto repair, which was pretty deep into that residential neighborhood. So while it wasn't identified as a key development area, you'll recall those in the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan, the plan did expect high-density residential in this area. It does comply with the zoning for WR4. The setbacks are being met, the density is being met, the parking is being met, height and lot coverage are also being met, and everything will be confirmed at the time of building permit. Under site suitability, all the access requirements are being met. The fire marshals reviewed the access through the parking lot and found it to be adequate. There's no environmental constraints on the property. Parking standards are being met. Open space isn't a requirement for conditional use permits, but they are providing some landscaped areas around the site. The project is also well situated to take advantage of surrounding recreational amenities, including the trails along Wisconsin Avenue and the railroad, Sir Optimus Park, and nearby City Beach. The plan shows some landscaping around the buildings, and of course this will be a requirement at the time of building permit. Right now, the property is nearly completely encumbered by pavement and buildings. There isn't a lot of landscaping out there at all. So landscaping will be a welcome addition to this site. There's some large trees out in the front of the property, in front of the single-family homes, and we've recommended a condition of approval to see if those trees are, one, long-lived, and if they're in a location that can be saved. Water is available in Skiles Place, sewer is available. They aren't adding, our current standards for stormwater dictate that you have to do an engineered drainage plan. If you're adding 5,000 square foot or more impervious area, they're actually removing impervious area because of the site's almost entirely paved. So they technically aren't required to do an engineered stormwater plan, but we are recommending that they do that. The project fronts on Skiles Place and will access onto the public street, which was upgraded a number of years ago with curb, gutter, and sidewalk. At that time, they didn't do streetlights or street trees. But there will be 3 driveways that will be removed as part of this project and require the boulevard to be restored. We have also recommended a condition of approval that they do install some street trees along there. The applicant did submit a TIS, a traffic impact study, as part of the application. The study indicates there will be 25 new AM peak hour trips and 30 PM peak hour trips for a total of 395 weekday total trips at full build out. The study indicates that the project would not create any new roadway capacity problems in the area, and goes on to recommend that the applicant work with the city to develop a plan to implement the left-hand turn lane at Wisconsin northbound onto Skiles Place. Wisconsin Avenue, as you know, is a state highway, and we don't have the ability to control the projects that happen within that right-of-way. The 2009 Transportation Plan identified a series of improvements along Wisconsin Avenue, including left-hand turn lane onto Skiles Place. MDT has looked at Skiles Place as a priority in the recent past, but they're limited by funding. So a useful way to work with the city to implement that plan would be for the applicant to pay their share of improvements. In 2012, the engineers working for MDT came up with an estimate of $345,000 for a left-hand turn lane at that intersection. So that's construction, right-of-way acquisition, and utility relocation. Using a 3% inflationary rate, the current project cost would be $424,000. And then according to the TIS, the project's going to increase traffic through that intersection by 2.6%. So just a little bit there. So their share of that $424,000 is $11,032. So staff has recommended a condition of approval that a cash in lieu of left-hand turn lane be paid prior to submitting an application for a building permit. And the city will hold that funds until such time as that project gets built. The current levels of service are adequate at the intersections identified in the TIS, and at full build out, the intersections will continue to function within acceptable levels. Summer traffic is causing Wisconsin-Skiles intersection to fail, but that's happening now. And it's expected that these busy times, folks will use Iowa Avenue instead of Skiles Place to access their homes. Iowa Avenue doesn't have any traffic calming measures or stop signs or anything to slow traffic down, so staff is recommending a condition of approval for the applicant's engineer to work with Public Works to review these uncontrolled intersections and develop and implement a plan for slowing traffic down. Finally, the left-hand turn lane on northbound Wisconsin Avenue onto Edgewood Place is designated with a flashing yellow. Again, this is an MDT project. We don't have a lot of control over them changing it. Over the last bunch of years, the city has requested MDT to change this to a designated green arrow. And accordingly, MDT studied the issues before making any sort of decisions. So as of a couple of months ago, when the report was written, MDT had collected all the data that they needed, but they were still completing their analysis and report. They don't have a timeline for completing this project, and city staff will continue to work with MDT to move this up on their priority list. And then just today, I left another message. I didn't hear back from MDT if there was any update on that information. Under neighborhood community compatibility, the applicant is proposing to put the more massive building toward the south, adjacent to other commercial buildings and multifamily structures, and has reduced the size of the building along the street. As public comment has pointed out, there are no other 3-story buildings in this neighborhood, but they do meet the building height standards. One building within the Alpenglow Apartments is going to be 3 stories, the one at the northwest corner, and that's actually going to exceed the building height. They got a deviation through the PUD. There are also some 3-story buildings to the east side of Wisconsin Avenue. Buildings this tall may not be found to integrate into neighborhoods, and it's difficult with infill type projects. 2 stories or buildings step down towards single family or strategies that can help to achieve neighborhood compatibility. Massing, bulk, and scale are reviewed by the Architectural Review Committee. So the existing neighborhood is a mix of high and medium density residential and commercial uses. This project will increase the density of the neighborhood, but this is the density that's permitted by the zoning district, provided all the development standards can be met, and was anticipated as part of the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan. High-density housing should be in areas that are walking distance to services, such as shopping, work centers, and schools, and also conveniently located next to transit. So the snow bus goes down Wisconsin Avenue, the Eagle Transit pickup is at the O'Shaughnessy Center. There are several multifamily projects in this area. As proposed, this project would be one of the highest density projects in the neighborhood. So then the planning board, they held a public hearing on July 18th. We heard from 6 folks from the neighborhood, and you have the minutes in your packets. The public voiced concerns about traffic on Wisconsin Avenue and within the neighborhood, parking, the increase in density, size of the building, snow removal, and the landscape buffering. The planning board was unable to make a recommendation. for or against the project. A motion to approve failed, a motion to deny failed, so you have no recommendation from the planning board. The planning board did talk about a couple of conditions of approval, so I put those down for your consideration if you are able to make a decision for the project. That was to include bike racks at or near each building entrance, and that an on-site manager would be required. So staff is still recommending approval of this project, subject to the 9 conditions of approval found on page 103 of your packet. Just at some of the highlights of those conditions, we would like to see the applicant work with the Public Works Department to review the traffic on Iowa and implement some sort of traffic calming. That the existing 3 driveway approaches onto Skiles Place be removed and revegetated, and coordinate with the Parks Department for the installation of street trees. And then prior to submitting a building permit, the property is 4 lots, so we'd have them eliminate the lot lines, obtain architectural review approval, pay a fee to the city of Whitefish for their share of the improvements for Wisconsin and Skiles, and then submit a tree preservation plan for some of those trees out front. Can I answer any questions? And I also have a Google map here for you if you'd like to get a context of the neighborhood.
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy on her staff report or the application? Frank?
Wendy, I've got a series of questions, but the one that just piqued my interest is, does the Architectural Review Committee have the authority to require that building height be reduced?
So they can look at scale and mass of the building, and if mass requires that the building be kind of brought down to more of a neighborhood scale, certainly that's within their purview.
Have they done that in the past? Do they know that that's part of their purview?
I mean, I think they do know that, but they haven't made that requirement.
Okay.
It's more other types of techniques to reduce the overall mass of the building that they've worked on.
Okay, what influence, if any, and I think you kind of alluded to it, do we have on MDT in terms of a change in how that light functions at Edgewood?
See if Craig has an answer to that question.
We've met with MDT on a number of occasions and looked at that light. Most recently, we met with Representative Fern and kind of a group of MDT officials and showed them our concerns. We haven't made any progress with them, but we do remind them on a regular basis, you know, that we feel that that light meets the warrant for a controlled left turn or a protected left turn arrow. We just haven't made any progress in getting that to happen. So I guess in answer to the question, we don't have a whole lot of influence, but we're aware of the issue and we're bringing it to their attention every opportunity possible.
I hear what you're saying, but it makes me crazy that MDT treats us like that. It's just wrong. Okay.
Further questions, Frank?
Not for right now. Thank you.
Any other members of the council questions? Richard?
It came up, I think I asked the question at the planning board, whether or not a soil contamination survey had been done, and I don't know if that's your answer or the developer's answer.
That's something from the applicant.
Okay.
Further questions? I have a couple. I believe in the planning board minutes, of course, this application came through after our mandatory affordable housing
Correct.
ordinance was adopted, yet there was a comment made at the planning board. It's in the minutes that if the applicant's representative would circle back with the actual developer to see if he would be willing to voluntarily donate up to a certain percentage of these units as deed restricted affordable. Have we received any word back from the developer on that, or
No.
is the applicant's representative prepared to address that tonight? Don't see the applicant's representative.
I think, yeah, they'll talk.
You'll talk about that this evening? Okay. Secondly, I guess a question for perhaps Craig or Angie, under a conditional use permit, if we do identify certain aspects of the project having significant impact to the adjacent neighborhoods, whether it's, well, in this case, traffic and circulation and congestion, impact to residential neighborhoods, despite the fact that the property's bordered by WR4 and WB1 on 3 sides at least, not to the north. The conditions that have been added by the planning board include potential mitigation actions that the developer could undertake with the city on Iowa Avenue, traffic calming, et cetera, but also the cash in lieu for intersection improvements at Skiles and Wisconsin Avenue. Can you specifically address, Craig, or maybe not specifically, but kind of expand on that a little bit? What types of offsite improvements could we require as a council or your department with regards to Iowa Avenue improvements? And can we do more for the Skiles, Wisconsin intersection, understanding that DOT is not going to move the needle on Wisconsin Avenue for at least 10 years?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a variety of traffic calming remedies that we could do on Iowa, as simple as signage to as complex as narrowing the road and actually making the road feel like a more residential, quieter type of a roadway. You know, the way that the condition is worded is such that the city will work with the applicant, but it doesn't talk about, you know, any specific boundaries to that. You know, so the council could potentially add a little meat to that condition if, you know, if cash is to be paid towards that, or if some type of actual improvement wants to be identified, whether it be signage or reduction in road width. But we'd really want to look at that road and see, you know, what types of improvements are suitable for that type of road. I mean, it's a local street. It doesn't necessarily serve as a collector, but, you know, this project will be adding traffic. And so we do want to make sure that that traffic is calm and controlled. As far as the work on Wisconsin Avenue, yeah, correct. Again, it's an MDT right-of-way, and it's a fairly expensive project to add that left turn lane. This project will be increasing the traffic about 3%, and so that's where we came up with the cash in lieu number. But at this point, the city only gets a certain amount of urban funds that we can spend on Wisconsin Avenue because it is an MDT right-of-way, and I think creating that left turn lane would pretty much deplete the balance that we have for Wisconsin Avenue.
Okay, just expanding on Iowa Avenue, for example, when I look at the cumulative impacts that adjacent developments will inevitably have in this area, notably the quarry, for example, when that road eventually punches through from Wisconsin to Dakota. You know, during those public hearings, we heard substantial comment from the public with regards to Dakota then being the bypass route to avoid turning onto Wisconsin. Folks are going to use Dakota to go out to the signaled intersection at Edgewood to take a left to go up to, you know, the Big Mountain, for example. I live in that neighborhood. I work on the corner of Skiles and Wisconsin, so I observe the traffic patterns there on a daily basis. And to your point about Iowa, it's substantially overwidened, as you acknowledged. In order to calm traffic on a street that's definitely being utilized as a cut across. I mean, there's no doubt about it that people are coming down Dakota. They take a left on Skiles and they take a right on Iowa to cut over to Edgewood to hit the traffic signal. I observe it. Can you expand on what level of improvements we could require of the developer specific to Iowa? I mean, that boulevard's substantially wide. Could you require curb and gutter and sidewalk, boulevard trees, and kind of a typical street section be developed as part of this project?
Yeah, I mean, Iowa doesn't currently meet any of the standards that we have for roadways in the engineering standards. You know, I mean, it would likely require a significant additional boulevard. It would, you know, could require bulb outs at the intersection of, what would that be, Iowa and, what's the next one south of Skiles?
Waverly.
Waverly Place, I believe.
Waverly, then Woodland.
Again, given the, you know, the impact of this development to the overall traffic patterns, though, I don't think full cost would necessarily be fair. We'd have to take a deeper look at the traffic impact statement and see, you know, that 3% number was the anticipated impact on the Wisconsin-Skiles intersection.
Right.
I believe it only projects about 10% of the traffic of those 300 trips per day. I want to say about 10% of those are going to go south on Iowa. You know, so those 30 trips don't equate to nearly the same percentage on Iowa as it does to Skiles in Wisconsin. So we'd probably want to look at that in a little more detail and come up with a, you know, not only a cost estimate for the proposed improvements, but what the accurate percentage would be to apply.
Okay. And does the Iowa Avenue by any chance appear on our priority list for resort tax?
Not sure where it appears, but we're actually planning to do some seal coating on Iowa next week. Let me get back to you on that. I'm
Yeah,
gonna have to
thanks,
pull it
Craig.
up.
Yeah, it's on the list, but I think it's,
I'm just wondering what the ranking is. Thanks, Craig. We'll circle back with you. Any further questions for staff? Richard?
How wide is that sidewalk currently? It's 4 feet on Skiles?
I think that's what, do you know? I think 5?
It's probably 5 feet.
Normal shared path would be a minimum of 6?
I don't know what shared path standard is.
Typically, we like to see shared use paths at least 8.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. We did advertise for a public hearing on item 6C of the agenda. Before we take public comment, I would invite the applicant or the applicant's representative, if you have anything additional to add, now would be your opportunity. Dave, for the record, your name and address, please.
Good evening, Mayor Mulfeld, councilors. My name is Dave DeGrandpre. I'm with Land Solutions and from Charlotte, Montana. And I'd just like to take a few minutes of your time tonight, talk about a few issues. First, is that good enough?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Jake, do you mind turning up the public microphone? Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. First, to talk about some of the planning and zoning related issues, talk about the development process that the city of Whitefish has set up and how this project has met all of the requirements, and then to talk about some of the specific issues that emerged at the planning board meeting and also that have come up through public testimony and comments. So, and I'm here tonight with the project engineer, Mark Lechte, the project architect, Mark Johnson, and also Ryan Purdy, the attorney on the project. Unfortunately, Bob Ablin, the traffic engineer who did the traffic impact study, is unable to join us tonight. But so hopefully we can answer the questions that you have regarding that, or can at least maybe require or look to assistance of your public works director to assist. But to start with the planning and zoning process. So as you probably know, there are about 6 different reviews that the city of Whitefish has set up for a project like this, or 6 different stages in the development review process. The first is planning, okay? So you need to get the planning right. And so as Wendy talked about, the Wisconsin Avenue Corridor Plan evaluated this area quite closely. It evaluated not just this property, but surrounding properties all up and down Wisconsin, going east and west on both sides. And it's a quite deliberative public process with the planning board, with your staff, with consultants, with the public. And so at the end of the day, in April of 2018, this body approved the corridor plan, which designated not only the subject properties, but also surrounding properties to be high-density residential. Step number 2, getting the zoning right. In November of 2018, the applicant approached the city and said, we'd like to make the zoning align with your plan, help you to implement your plan. And so through, again, a deliberative public process, working with your staff, working with the planning board and zoning commission yourselves, the zoning was modified to R4, high density residential. High density is a relative term. For the city of Whitefish, this project may be considered high density, but certainly having something like a maximum 35-foot building heights, having a maximum 40% lot coverage, not high density in an urban context, but certainly for the city of Whitefish, it meets that. So we've got the planning right and the zoning right. Next step, number 3, that's where we are right now. We're getting toward it. We started very broad, and now we're getting more narrow. We get down to the site planning process, which is where we are today. And so, in my view, in my experience, 20 years working as a land use planner, the most important thing is to make sure that the site plan complies with the zoning. Okay, so in this case, as Wendy discussed, there are items like the setbacks, lot coverage, building height, density. There are several other parameters, and this project meets those parameters, your zoning, in every respect. There are no variances requested, which I'm happy to report. A couple of other, or actually 3 other steps that are required. Next would be the Architectural Review Committee to make sure that the mass, the bulk, the scale fits in with the neighborhood, building materials, siting on the property, things like that are compatible. Next is engineering review, which is actually ongoing right now. And then finally, you've got a building permit review. So about 6 different steps in the process. Here we are at number 3. But the point of me bringing that up is there's quite a bit of review that's gone into this project already. There's more to come. The applicant hopes to make this project compatible with your vision for the city of Whitefish or for this neighborhood, and also to help you achieve some of your goals with regard to providing housing for the community, for the workforce, providing an attractive location, and attractive product, and nice places for people to live. With regard to some of the issues that have come up, one of the issues, Mayor Mulfeld, that you brought up was affordable housing. Would the developer be interested in donating, dedicating a certain number of units to the legacy home, under the legacy home requirements? The answer is no. The project is intended to be, it's intended to be market rate, but I will say a few things. First, the units are relatively small. They're from 415 square feet to 800, it's roughly 800, 900 square feet. You've got studio apartments, 1-bedroom apartments, 2-bedroom apartments. And I've reviewed your affordable housing work that you did over probably last 2 or 3 years. You know, there are several different ways to address housing requirements within the city of Whitefish, and this is the private development community coming forward and helping to supply units, 54 in this case. These aren't condos, these aren't residences for the wealthy. These are for normal working people. So while it's market rate and the developer's not interested in donating or dedicating units under the inclusionary zoning requirements, the developer is hoping to help provide some housing that will meet the market. The second item has to do with Councilor Hildner. At the planning board meeting, you brought up a question regarding how would this project help the city to implement the climate action plan. One of the main goals of the climate action plan is to reduce emissions. And there are a couple of different ways that this project does that. The first is through design, construction specifically. So this development is subject to the 2012 International Energy Efficiency Code, which deals with all sorts of things, from better roofing materials to insulation, siding, windows, doors, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, all of those things to provide efficiency. So it would require less, and certainly a multifamily or 2 multifamily structures require much less energy to heat and cool than an equivalent number of single-family residences. So it certainly helps to reduce emissions in that respect. The second one is vehicle miles traveled. Okay, so you've got 54 units that would help meet some of the demand that otherwise might be located in Columbia Falls, might be located out in Flathead County, wherever. And so it's helping to put families in an area where you're close to schools, you're close to recreational facilities, you're close to downtown, you've got pedestrian bicycle facilities nearby. So certainly there'll be people who own cars and drive cars back and forth, but I think in terms of efficiency and reducing vehicle emissions and energy consumption, this is a good way to do it. And I have a sense that that's one of the reasons that you all decided to make this area high-density residential, is because it was located or is located close to schools, recreational facilities, downtown, et cetera. Moving on to traffic issues. Certainly there are concerns with Wisconsin and Iowa. We recognize that. So the developer has and we understand that MDT is a slow-moving machine. It takes a long time to get these improvements made. There are things like right-of-way to acquire, design, construction. It's a multi-year process. The developer has no problem in paying a proportional share of the improvements, which has been recommended by staff. A proportional share, what that means, of course, is only so many vehicle trips are going to be generated by this development. The developer can't be held responsible to footing the bill for all improvements on Wisconsin or Iowa, but I mean, what's fair is fair, and so the developer is willing to contribute. And Iowa, I recognize, is a little bit complicated. The way the condition's worded right now is a bit vague. I appreciate that, and so hopefully we can come up with a way to make it a little more solid or sure, so that the local residents aren't unduly impacted, so that some good solutions can be found, I suppose. Next item I'd like to talk about just briefly is architectural design. So I mentioned that this is one of the steps in the review process. I realize that a three-story building, right now there isn't a three-story building in the immediate vicinity. There's one just on the east side of Wisconsin over the viaduct, or might be a couple over there, but not right here. Apparently there's going to be an affordable housing project located directly south of this project in not too long. It's a tax credit project, I believe. So there will be soon. And frankly, this is a transitioning neighborhood. And I know that growing pains are painful, they're difficult. But this is the vision that you all have set out. The developer, again, is not asking for any variances, is happy to go through the architectural review process. We've got a couple of, if you're interested, we've got a couple of conceptual renderings put together that I can show you. In some ways I'm hesitant to do that because if someone sees a picture, sometimes they think that's it just gets locked in their mind. And we realize that you have a process set up to review the architecture, scale, massing, and that sort of thing. So, and we're happy to go through that process. But we recognize that this is a bit of a change for the neighborhood. We also know that this is what you all have chosen for your vision for the area. So we're happy to help you implement that. Next issue has to do with stormwater. As Wendy mentioned, currently all the site pretty much is covered with impervious surface. This will reduce the amount of stormwater runoff. Although an engineered plan is not required under your rules, one is being developed, and maybe even has been already submitted for initial review. So it's an engineered stormwater management plan to collect, and transport, and deal with the stormwater from the site. So we recognize that that's important. Snow removal is an issue that's come up as well. In a heavy winter or after heavy snow, some of the snow will be able to be stored on site in the green spaces. Other snow will probably have to be hauled off. I don't know exactly where that will go, but I know that this project certainly would not be unique in the city of Whitefish for having to address the issue in the same manner. And so it seems as though solutions can certainly be found to that by hiring a contractor to haul off snow. And then garbage, the original site of dumpsters has been moved, and it's now on the west side. If you'd like, I could bring up that site plan again, but what's planned to be along the outside of these dumpsters are 6-foot fences and then landscaping, essentially to screen it from the adjoining residential properties. And then the last issue, I think, has to do with environmental concerns. There was a question that was brought up about the site itself, and I was just handed this a few minutes ago, but it's an executive summary from a Phase 2 environmental site assessment conducted by Applied Water Consulting. And I'll read you just the last paragraph. 4 soil borings were drilled within the drain field area to evaluate, it's the current drain field area, to evaluate the potential presence of petroleum contamination in the subsurface soil profile. The borings were installed using the direct bush technology method. Soil samples were collected from each boring at depths determined in the field and analyzed for a suite of petroleum contaminants. The results of the laboratory analyses indicated that petroleum contaminants were not identified in the samples. No further investigation is recommended at this time based on the results of the Phase 2 ESA findings. And if you'd like, I'm happy to, you'd all like to see this? Sure.
For the record, I'll hand it to our city clerk.
I think that concludes my presentation, but the others, team members and myself are here to answer any of your questions or to address issues brought up by the public as you see fit.
Thanks, Dave. Before you sit down, are there any questions for Dave? I'll start with Richard and then Ryan.
Sure. You mentioned that the developer is unwilling to provide affordable housing. Can you tell me the difference, but you're going to stick with market rate, what is the disparity currently between market rate and affordable on one of your one-bedroom units?
Well, what would be, I guess, first of all, say I don't know exactly what the rental price is going to be. But could you please tell me?
I would think that you would already know what the market rate is, and we've already published what the affordable rate is. And what is that disparity?
I have a sense of what the market rate is, but I can't guarantee that it'll be rented for that price. I believe it's roughly $800 a month, but I don't,
For a one-bedroom?
I think that was the studio. But I hope you won't quote me on that. It's right in that neighborhood. But I don't know exactly what the difference is, I guess, between, what is
That's what I'm
a
asking.
studio? Do you know how much a studio would cost under your program?
I don't know right now, but
$738. So it's,
is that for one bedroom or is that for a studio?
thank you.
$738 for a studio?
That's what I hear.
Is that correct, Wendy?
According to our administrative guidelines that just were approved by you folks, for a studio, 60% AMI would be 732, 70% AMI would be 854, and 80% AMI would be 976. So 732 to 976.
Okay.
So 800 is in the ballpark.
Thanks, Wendy.
Richard, anything further for Dave?
Not right now.
Any other questions from the council? Ryan?
Who's going to manage these units, do you know?
I believe there'll be an on-site manager. So someone's hired, lives there. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. We'll
Thank you
call
very
you
much.
back up if we have further questions. Now would be the public's opportunity to provide testimony on this item. I do have a sign-up sheet, and I'll just start at the top and work my way down. But certainly, if you did not sign up, you're not prevented from providing comments. So please approach the podium if I don't call your name. And we'll start with Mark, and then we'll move on to Jan Metzmaker and Scott Countryman after that.
The site plan back up on the screen.
Thanks, Wendy. Please don't be shy. Public comment? Who would like to start? Jan? Okay, thanks.
Jan Metzmaker, 915 Dakota. I live in this neighborhood, and I really don't care if the project meets all the parameters in the zoning regulations. I'm very concerned about the negative impacts this will have, especially at the intersection of Iowa and Skiles. That is a very dangerous intersection. If you're going north-south, there's no stop sign. If you go east-west, it just stops there. And I've seen many, many close collisions because they don't know the people coming down the hill don't stop. And in the winter, it's very treacherous because it's icy. I'm concerned that the traffic study was done in April and not during the summer. If you're dropping a boat off at City Beach and you're going up the Skiles Hill because there's no place to park down there, you're going to make a straight shot and you leave your boat, your trailer, and your big rig on Skiles. There's going to be no place to park. It's scary and it's hazardous. Skiles is a major travel corridor for all the kids heading to City Beach and Seroptimus Park. I don't think it's fair for the people of Iowa to have to put up with the impacts of funneling more traffic down their street when there are no curbs, sidewalks, and gutters. And if those improvements are made, who picks up that tab? Is it going to be through an SID, through resort tax? Traffic calming, I don't think it's going to work. And I know those people in Iowa do not want more traffic down their road. The project is too dense, it's too tall, it's not affordable, it's not compatible with the neighborhood. People are going to lose their views. They may have had a view of the big mountain, and now they're going to have a 3-story building. A lot of talk about no turn on Wisconsin. Traffic backs up through the light, and it looks like we're not going to see any improvements there for a long time. I think it is irresponsible to create more traffic, even if it's 2.6%, onto Wisconsin, which is incredibly difficult to cross now in the height of summer and during ski season. And just because a property is zoned high density does not mean it should be granted when there are so many impacts on the neighbors. It's just not fair. And that's why we go through this process, because there are major impacts to this neighborhood. And you have many reasons to reject this project, and you're going to hear from a lot of the people who live there who will give you more reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
Hi, my name is Pam Spar, 511 Dakota Avenue. So the way I see this is there's a discussion about traffic, and what we need to be looking at is not this one particular project. We need to be looking at the cumulative effects of all the development that is being approved for Wisconsin Avenue. We have 3 high-density projects going in, and there have been no adequate improvements done to Wisconsin Avenue to handle the increased traffic, and it is tremendous. And anybody who drives on that road or even lives, and I'll say on the wrong side of the tracks, has a lot of experience with what that means. There has been a plan that's been in place for 10 years in terms of improving Wisconsin. And I hear that the city can't do anything, or they try to influence the state, but as it stands, that influence obviously isn't having the impact that we need it to have. So from where I sit, what makes more sense, to the extent the city can't control what the state does with the road, the city does have some control over the pace of development. And it can ensure that in terms of safety and quality of life in this town, that pace is met properly with the adequate improvements to Wisconsin Avenue before we continue to allow these high-density developments to go in. So it's really a sequencing issue. What makes sense? What comes first? And I would urge the council to consider this in terms of a timing issue and to say, let's hit the pause button on these further high-density developments until we have that influence and we have the impact that we want to have to improve Wisconsin Avenue and make it adequate for what we're allowing to happen here in terms of development. So from that perspective, that's the traffic piece. I'd like to address a few other concerns that I have. The parking is inadequate. So what's going to happen here is that we're going to be exacerbating, again, what's happening on Skiles. There will not be adequate parking. People will spill out over onto Skiles, and for those who are working on the corner there at Skiles and Wisconsin, there's already parking that happens on that street. So now we're adding more, and of course in the summer we've got the trailers. So the whole thing is really, it has potential to have safety issues. When people try to make a left-hand turn, they're going to be squeezed down. There's going to be no room and no time to make the turns in a safe fashion. The mass, 3 stories. It's going to tower over these residential homes. And as Jan said, it's incompatible, plain and simple. And I understand that there's a Wisconsin plan that's been put in place, but I urge the council to consider what that really means for people who have called this home for a very long time. And I would request that the density, we're talking in terms of number of units here, these are fairly small units. Does it really have to be, we're kind of warehousing people a little bit in terms of this density. Does it really need to be that just because it can be that under the zoning code? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Pam. Who's next?
Scott Countryman, 239 Dakota Avenue. First, I think we need to back the bus up one step. I think we're still at step 2, contrary to what was stated earlier by the representative. We have not passed the planning process yet. In an unprecedented situation, the planning board was unable to give you a recommendation on this development. That should ring in your head as there's problems with this project that they couldn't resolve. So we're still at step 2. And I wrote this down, I apologize, I got glasses on. But I want you to know that you guys have an exasperated planning board. There were some comments made, you'll find them in your minutes, where the planning director, the planning board director aligned with many of the neighbors in the neighborhood saying, there's not much we can do about this. It's happening. It's happening in my backyard. I feel for you guys. You should come to my house and see what I have to look out my back door. And I was thinking, gosh, maybe I should go do that. But the reality is, all I have to do is walk out my front porch, and I'm looking up at the twin towers of duplexes built on the hill between me and City Beach that's 3 stories tall, that doesn't fit the WR2 zoning, which apparently no longer do we have to have the secondary residence be in less diminutive size than the primary residence, because the townhouse, the duplex, says they can be of the same size. So that added to some frustration that the planning board was aligning with us and the problems that we're running into with this project. Another member of the planning board directly ask the planning department, why is it that we are constantly having to answer the question of the lesser of two evils? I want that to sink in. If our planning board is always having to decide between the lesser of two evils, what's happening to Whitefish? It's going to become evil. It's going to become a place where people don't want to live. So as we're beating this drum on low-income housing, workforce housing, we also need to be playing the trumpet of longevity and encouraging people to stay living in Whitefish. Otherwise, we will have a major shift in this population of this town. After the for sale sign went up on the townhouse on the hill by Dakota and Skiles, a subsequent for sale sign went up on the corner of Dakota and Skiles. That resident wanting to get out of Whitefish, tired of Whitefish, wants to get out in the county and get away from what's happening in Whitefish. There are numerous issues about the traffic that we could go through, but what I want to make sure that we understand is that bad planning has left the door open for a California developer to come in, build on this property without care for public safety in our neighborhood. That, to me, is inexcusable, and I don't think was the intent of opening up the zoning for this area behind Wisconsin and Skiles. In 2009, Wisconsin was deemed to have many addressable issues, including the intersection of Skiles and Wisconsin. The intersection's failing. I don't care if you put 1% more traffic on an intersection that's failing, it's failing more. We have a traffic study that clicks cars that pass over a cable. That's a car count study. That's not a traffic study. That's not taking into account the amount of pedestrian traffic using the bike path that a driver, myself included, who wants to take a left onto Skiles off of Wisconsin, has to clear traffic moving at 35 miles an hour, find my hole, get through the intersection, and then check to see if there's any pedestrians in the walkway. Well, I will tell you that the bicycle traffic heading northbound on that bike path, when they see that Skiles is clear, they're not slowing down. They're going 10, 15, 20 miles an hour. And you expect me as the driver to not only clear oncoming traffic, but clear a blind spot where I can't even see a bicyclist coming at 10 to 20 miles an hour on a bike path. You add 50 to 75 beds in this development, and they're small bedrooms, studios, single beds, 2 beds. You have a 1-to-1 car ratio of beds to cars, guarantee it. So if you have 50 to 75 more cars making that turn from Wisconsin to Skiles, you have 75 more opportunities a day for the front end of a car to meet a pedestrian in that walkway or a bicyclist. That's what happens on a failing intersection. That's what happens when the MDT doesn't intervene. That's what happens when we as a city change our zoning to high-density residential without first asking the question, wait, back in 2009, we referenced that Skiles and Dakota, or Skiles and Wisconsin was failing. We better get that fixed before we drop more population on it. The wisdom in the Wisconsin Planning Corridor group was that 4 key development areas were specified. My opinion, sound, pragmatic development would have allowed those 4 key development areas, the one on Edgewood, what's affectionately known as the Chicken Coop Project up across from the Ice Den, and then those up by Big Mountain and the turn to Big Mountain, be developed first. And that was highlighted by the previous person. Then see how the system is failing. Fix the system. Add more high residential as capacity permits. As it is, we lifted up the kimono. Here's our Wisconsin corridor. Here's high residential. Developers, what do you got for us? We don't care about public safety. We care about low-income, affordable housing, which you're going to get none out of this project, by the way. So why would you expose the city and its constituents and its population to a major safety concern over 54 beds? So I have a couple of solutions. John, can you call Governor Bullock before he leaves office? See if he can light a fire under MDT as a favor. Say, you know what, our planning got ahead of us. We've got some public safety concerns. We need to get MDT down here and working on Wisconsin now. and see if he'd be willing to pull a few favors. We need to treat Wisconsin like we do in town, with a couple of flashing pedestrian-initiated crossways. We have a spot down by the ice den where the bike path crosses from the east side to the west side, totally unprotected. Traffic's moving at 35 miles an hour. Traffic needs to be slowed to 25 miles an hour on Wisconsin. I know we can't dictate that, but it's an action item for the MDT when they listen. We need a crossway that can be initiated by pedestrians at Wisconsin and Skiles, so that people living on the east side of Wisconsin can safely access City Beach when they're walking to or riding to City Beach. That would help with the safety. Overflow parking. Pilot project, permitted parking around the City Beach area. Right now, when Cypress Yard has an event, their parking flows onto Skiles, right in front of where this development is going to land. That's a problem. If we had a permitted parking solution where residents of households, not renters of apartments, could get a street parking permit, that would prevent commercial parking on Skiles. That would force an issue, John, where Cypress Yard might come to the River Design Group and say, hey, can we lease your parking lot during your off hours so that we can have parking when we have stuff going on at night and on the weekends? As opposed to having it bleed onto Skiles. Same for Hunter. She's right next door. But a permanent parking solution would prevent, if there is not enough parking in this development, from bleeding out onto the street. They wouldn't have a recourse. There's no way to park. So I would hope that we could entertain a permanent parking solution in the city, or at least pilot the program around City Beach. I'd be all on board, be totally on board. I would not park on Skiles or Dakota, or give me one guest pass that I could give to a friend if they came to visit me. Put it in their windshield. That's all it needs. Question for the planning and the study. If egress out of this development is to occur on Iowa and then onto Edgewood, and Edgewood ultimately to become an on-ramp onto Wisconsin, where was the automobile counter on Iowa? Where was the automobile counter on Edgewood? We need to ask the city that question. What did the traffic study reveal? And I hate calling it a traffic study because all it's doing is clicking automobiles. It's not accounting for traffic. If Edgewood is going to become an on-ramp to Wisconsin, we need to retool Edgewood. All of that parking that happens on the north side of Edgewood should be moved and shifted towards the railroad so that people can enter Edgewood safely from Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, without having to clear parked trucks and trailers. So if this project's going to go through, there better be a component to Edgewood that is addressed, because it needs to be. Today, I have to stick my nose out into Edgewood in order to clear oncoming traffic because I can't see around the trucks that are parked there with their trailers. Put them on the other side of the street. Clear the parking on the north side so that traffic can pass and traffic that's entering this on-ramp to Wisconsin can clear safely. Lastly, this is a Hail Mary. This developer from California bought 4 city lots, WR4. What is to say that we have to erase the lot lines of these 4 lots? What is to say that we don't ask the developer to honor the lot lines? And I'm not a developer. I'm not in city law. I don't know if we have to erase those lines because they own the adjacent lots. But if they have the right to develop, we have the right, perhaps, to satisfy setback requirements on 4 lots, not combine it into 1 lot. I don't know if that's a possibility. It's a question that I'd love for you to ask the planning department when we're done with public comment. But I would take into heed what came out of the planning department. You have a tired planning department. Their hands are tied. They're choosing the lesser of 2 evils. DEQ is not going to allow this to get connected to city water. We haven't said the M word, but effectively we are in a moratorium for construction because we don't have the water supply. So let's embrace it. Let's embrace a moratorium. Let's get the zoning down right. to where our building department cannot have to choose the lesser of two evils, but can choose what's good for this town. So that more people stay put, fewer for sale signs go up on these homes next to these developments as they're occurring. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Who's next? Leo.
I'll say what he said. That was pretty good. Leo Keene, I live at 514 Pine Place, is a couple blocks up the hill from the proposed development. Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. Edward Abbey. Boy, is that ever true? And I have to wonder about the ideology somewhat of the planning board when I read that the chairman said, if we don't approve this development, we'll stifle growth in Whitefish. Please do, or at least slow it down or control it like everybody here tonight has been saying. Like cancer, I feel like we're eating ourselves from the inside out. We're ruining quality of life for those of us who are fortunate to live here, for the benefit of the developer, and maybe a few other, well, there'll be a few other people who will benefit from this, the builders, the designers, they'll all benefit. There'll be 7,000 to 8,000 to 10,000 of us who will suffer the consequences of our diminished quality of life, those of us who live here already, fortunately. Not to mention the tourists who come here by the multitudes because they enjoy what we have and what we are. I don't see that this development is going to do Whitefish any good. And I think you, this council, has the power to deny it. I think you can. I mean, I hear again and again, well, our hands are tied. This is the zoning for this lot. Our hands are tied. If I hear that one more time, I'm going to get mad. Your hands aren't tied, I don't think. Public opinion has force. The lack of infrastructure has force. The fact that we don't have adequate sewer, apparently we don't have enough water to service this development, or even those of us who are here, we're running out of water. I think Andy Fury said it best when he voted against the quarry several months ago. And he said, I don't see that this development does Whitefish any good. Boy, that's really true here again tonight with this development here. It's not doing Whitefish any good. And I think the council here tonight has the power to deny it based on public opinion, lack of infrastructure, water, sewer, as widely pointed out, certainly the traffic congestion, the problems that we're having. So I really urge you to deny this tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Leo. Dick.
Dick Zollner, 1365 Vorman. Seems like every time that these big housing projects are brought forward, it's the same thing, just a different crowd. I think it is, like Leo's saying, I think it's ruining Whitefish. I think we assume a lot. We assume all these people that buy into there are going to work in Whitefish. There's nothing to say they're going to work here. If you got $1 an hour more in Columbia Falls, you jump in your car and go over there. They don't really care if they run a car and drive 8 miles. Everybody thinks we're so green, we're doing all this for the benefit of town. There's no guarantees at all. We assume all this. I went down to the dump the other day and came back at about 20 to 5. You couldn't believe all the cars heading north. Well, I don't know where they're going. They're probably not going to Eureka. It's all these people that work in Whitefish that also drive to Columbia Falls, Kalispell, and everywhere else to make a few more dollars. But we build these units thinking everybody's going to walk to town and go into a store and stay there the rest of their lives. It's not going to happen. But this is what I'm seeing with all these developments. So I'm just here, I don't even live in town, but I see the traffic problems, all the problems we're bringing in. And as far as I'm concerned, it's tourism. It's not green, it's not good for our economy. You need something else as a base. Then you get rid of all these affordable housing projects because you don't need them. But that's my take on it. Thanks.
Thanks, Dick. Connie.
Hi, I'm Connie Cohen. I live at 227 Iowa Avenue. And I want to say the bold printing on the letter I sent was an accident. I don't know how that happened. I don't know exactly where my property lines up on that. I'm on the west side, so and you can see a picture of where the houses are on the picture that has the neighborhood, but we don't
Wendy,
have
do you
it
mind pulling up the Google image?
we don't
Excuse
have
me,
it
Connie, we'll get that pulled
superimposed.
up for you. There we go.
What are we seeing? This is just an aerial of your. Oh, it's not. Oh, I see. It's that.
So your house is right.
Yeah. But what I mean is I can't see them superimposed, so I don't know where exactly. Do you have anything like that? Any way to superimpose the? Yeah. Well, anyhow, my property's kind of in the middle, and I have a deck on the back of my property on, facing east. And that seems to be where they're going to put the trash. And so I would like it if they would, I don't know if that's exactly where it is or not. But I'm hoping that it won't be right in front of my deck, Maybe, I'm especially worried about, 54 cars stopping there, getting out of their car, leaving their car running, and putting their trash in. So I'm hoping that maybe it could be arranged so that wherever they stop and leave their car won't be right in front of my deck. Maybe there's an architecture committee and a, landscaping committee. I don't know if they work together, they could. And another thing is, there's trees and bushes on the other side of their property, like my property. And so when they do the landscaping, I was hoping they could take into consideration what's on the other side, like the big trees and, anyhow, maybe they could consider that, what's on the other side of the, let's see if I can read this. And I'm also concerned with 54 units on such a small piece of land. And I know it's legal, but it seems like a lot. And 3 stories is out of character in the neighborhood. And I would prefer fewer units, but I guess they have their plans. And is dark sky lights required already? Oh, good, okay. Anyhow, I just hope that when they do the landscape, they'll work it out. To take out, oh, I already said that. And I wonder whether in the future, maybe when you make rules, if it's okay for someone to have the maximum density and the maximum height. I guess they can. Oh, and I was wondering about the access. There's just one access for 54 units. Is there a rule about that?
It's reviewed by the fire marshal and Public Works as well, so we do have
Oh.
standards for ingress and egress in
Okay,
terms
so
of
that's
emergency
already-
services and response.
Okay, I guess that's already been taken into consideration then. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Connie. Appreciate the comments tonight. Nancy?
Hello, Nancy Allen, 525 Hazel Place. That's right up the street, up Iowa. Everybody's spoken very eloquently. I am just here to say that I'm against this density in our neighborhood for all the same reasons. The traffic is a big issue. The parking is an issue, the snow removal, and I think I understood they're gonna fence it, so wouldn't that make it more difficult for snow removal? And the idea of you're gonna truck the snow out is just another big truck or a few trucks and we're already gonna have traffic issues. So yeah, the traffic, the parking, the density, not fitting the neighborhood, just generally a bad idea for our neighborhood, I think. I think that's all I have.
Thanks, Nancy.
Donna Elliott Scott, and I live at 309 Iowa Avenue. I'm the first one as soon as you turn right on Skiles in Iowa. There's 2 empty lots. And one of my concerns is the traffic and the noise ordinance around there. Already when it does calm down, you can hear it echoes through the whole neighborhood. And I just think on such a small piece of property, that's unheard of, 54 units. And usually everybody these days has a second car. Right now it's hard enough when people park on both sides of Skiles going toward Wisconsin. If there's parking on the street, that leaves you a 1-car lane just to get out to Wisconsin. If you go down Iowa, there's so many people that live there that they need sidewalks there. They don't need no more traffic. I'm a dog owner. I walk there constantly down Iowa Avenue. And I just wish for the protection and the safety of the children and the people of the neighborhood that this doesn't go through, because this is just too small of an area for that many people. And I agree with everybody that's came up, so I'll just make it short and sweet. I oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Further public testimony this evening on this item.
Wrote to the board as well. I'm Jenny Wilcox. I have 223 Iowa and 200.5 Wisconsin, right behind Hunter and Company. And the traffic, with everything they've all said, I just want it's important for you to make an appropriate decision that encompasses all of the things these people have said tonight. It's very, very important that this project not go through for the benefit of Whitefish as a whole and the benefit of our neighborhood, because I can see no redeeming factors. I'm on the exact south side of that, and thank you, Jan, about the weeds. The back of that property is covered with noxious weeds that have not been taken care of. Whenever they plowed my fence down. I quit even doing my fence anymore. So all of those things as an individual and all of those things as a neighborhood need to be taken into account. And you have the ability. Just because the rules have said it's legal and appropriate doesn't mean it's right. And there is something to be said for the ethics of Whitefish to embrace what we have here without it being overrun by outside developers in an inappropriate fashion. So I really would appreciate you not okaying this conditional use permit, banning this project. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm Tessa Pittman. I'm on 505 Dakota Avenue. I mean, I'm surrounded by exemplary neighbors. I mean, we're all begging to preserve what we have. I moved here with my family in 2013. I have a 9-year-old that goes to Muldown and a 7-year-old. My 9-year-old is begging to walk to school on her own. Something like this terrifies me. I mean, I've already been here talking about issues of traffic on Dakota, and the speed of traffic, and what we can do, and it's great that it's been heard. And I hear about Iowa, and I cringe. You know, that's Seroptimus Park. That's where people, kids are, learning to ride bikes. My son just got a skateboard. All these things are just, as a community, we have to set a precedence of what's important, and that's community and family and, what we want this town to be. I mean, everything that was said, I couldn't say it any better, but I'm fully against this. The traffic piece, I totally agree with everyone. I mean, the reality is everybody has a car, regardless if you drive to Columbia Falls or five minutes away, they're still driving. There's still gonna be cars. There's still gonna be that number of chances for there to be an accident. I don't want something bad to happen for something to change. And as a mom, as a parent in this community, I mean, I have wonderful neighbors, and we're all thinking of the same thing, and we really hope you hear this and make a decision to help, prevent this from going in. This is not going to benefit our community. And I would say, if the developer really says, we want to make this good for Whitefish, we want to do, when we built our house, we talked to our neighbors. I didn't get one complaint from any of our neighbors because we all talked to them, noise or anything. We didn't want to be disruptive to their life. It would be wonderful if the developer talked to the neighborhood, said, we really want to do this for Whitefish. What can we do? How can we make this better? That would be fantastic. I don't know if that's unheard of. Let's set a precedence. That would be great. So I don't know. I'll keep it short and sweet too. Let's be cognizant. Let's not set a precedence of something that we don't want to continue on, because open the door here and we don't know what's next. Thanks.
Thank you, Tessa. Further public comment tonight on this item?
Hi, I'm Julie Arnold. I'm on 700 Iowa Ave, so I'm up the hill. So excited to meet other Iowa Ave neighbors. I completely agree with what has been said opposing this. I'm in my 30s. I don't know any of my friends who are itching to live in a tiny cramped apartment. They would love to be in that neighborhood. And I think that neighborhood is a great family, working class, easygoing neighborhood. And a lot of those houses are up for rent, and they're available to people who bus your table, serve you a beer. I don't know who these apartments are for. It's not for my age range. It's not for my friends. I'm fortunate enough to live in that neighborhood, to own a home, to walk my dog through that wonderful, wonderful neighborhood, to City Beach, to see the sunset literally every night for the past 2 weeks. I'm so thankful for that, but I cannot imagine, I just keep staring at this map, and I cannot imagine a potential for anything else at all. And we've touched base on the intersections. There's 4 entryways into this neighborhood, 4. The only reason I see these apartments benefiting us is on 4th of July night when 54 people don't have to drive from City Beach. And that's it. But that's 54 more people at City Beach. And okay, our town is growing and changing, but I think if we all think about when we first moved here, or our first memories of Whitefish, and then how many rentals have been impacted by building and changing. And as renters, we feel like we don't have a voice to say, what's the goal here? What's the plan for Whitefish? What's the end game? So I feel like I'm speaking for a lot of people. People that are in their 30s, people who can't afford this, people who are working multiple seasonal jobs. And I'm just at a loss. I don't know how many parking spots. I'm happy to see they're all in the middle. Great, you all get to park in the middle, but I don't know how many there are. But walking through that neighborhood every day, there are campers, there are boats, there are multiple vehicles. We're not all gonna be squished into Whitefish. We're gonna wanna go to Glacier. We're gonna wanna go explore. And I feel like if I don't know the people who are going to sign the lease for these apartments, the people who are moving here are also gonna want those campers, those boats, those snowmobiles. I'm at a loss. I'm completely at a loss. And I thank all of you who have spoken to oppose it, because you all did an amazing job speaking up for our neighborhood. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Appreciate it. Further public comment tonight on this item? Marcia.
I'm obviously the grandmother of the crowd, longtime resident of Whitefish. Couple of things.
Name and address,
I'm
please,
sorry.
Marcia. I know what it
I
is.
know.
But
I can remember it. Marcia Sheffels, 450 Parkway Drive. I have many concerns, and the people who spoke tonight, just the passion that they have is just wonderful for an old person like me to see that kind of passion for Whitefish and Whitefish as we've known it. I think development perhaps has gone too far too fast. I do think you have a chance now to just settle back. In my previous occupation, I was able to work with the Montana Department of Transportation, and I went to the Montana Department of Transportation members. I got school bus routes changed. I got action because I just nagged them. And we have the same thing that we could do on Wisconsin. We have school bus routes there going all of the time. We have children walking to school. We have people on the bikes. I think we can move the Montana Department of Transportation to take a better look at us and the danger that is existing here now because of our increasing population. So I just hope you'll do that, because if they're pushed and they realize what's going on here, the effect on our children and our schools and transportation, I think they can be moved to look at us sooner. Thank you.
thanks, Marcia. Further public comment tonight? Any additional public comments? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council, but we are going to adjourn for about 7 minutes and we'll reconvene at 9:05. Thanks. false alarm. We're going to go ahead and get started. If folks could take their seats, please. We're back in session for this August 5th, 2019 meeting. We are on item 6C of the agenda. We took public comment and the public hearing is now closed, and I'll go ahead and turn it back to the council for discussion or a motion. Who would like to begin?
Mr. Mayor, I would make
Andy.
a motion. I'd like to make a motion, and I'm not just punting here, and I'll speak to it if I get a second, but I would like to make a motion to move this item and continue it on August 19th meeting.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Andy.
For everybody that came tonight, I don't want to push you off and make you come back 2 weeks from now, and that's not my intent here. My intent was to make a motion to deny, but to do that, we obviously have findings. Everything that everyone said tonight was certainly heard by us, certainly felt by us, and we feel it in many of these things that we deal with. But there are a lot of things that we have to cross the T's and dot the I's with if we're going to have any kind of legal ground to stand on. We can't just say enough's enough is unfortunately not a finding, and it's not something that has any legal standing in the court, and we can't hang our hats on that. So I'm making this motion to go ahead and continue on the 19th, and that motion is in part to allow staff to give us time and have them come up with a reasonable set of findings to support a denial. I think we have a number of ones that everyone alluded to tonight. Obviously, finding 4, traffic circulation, I think is certainly an issue. Finding 7, which is neighborhood compatibility, I think we can certainly find some issues there. And I think we can certainly find some issues with finding 5 also, and I specifically could look at police and fire. I think I'm not sure if the assistant chief would concur with this, but he probably would. I think that every time we approve something new, we obviously realize that we're putting more and more additional strain on our emergency services people with more calls and more houses and more doors to go into, and quite frankly, we're strained about as far as we can go. So that's the purpose of my motion, and I would like to see that pass.
Thanks, Andy. Further discussion on the motion. Richard.
I too want to appreciate all of the comments that we've received tonight from the public. The greatest force, if anything, is going to change in a timely fashion on Wisconsin in terms of the left turn and the turn off of Skiles from Wisconsin, that turn lane. It's going to take the same enthusiasm that you showed tonight to write to your elected officials in Helena, those that are local especially, and try to get the Montana Department of Transportation off the dime. Now's the time for them to make a motion, make a move, and to do what they need to do.
Thank you, Richard. Further comments on the motion?
If I may.
Frank.
Mr. Mayor, one of the reasons that I came to this dais was my experience in your chairs. It was the experience of dealing with an inappropriate development in the neighborhood in which I live. It was because of the enthusiasm and the collectiveness of the neighborhood that was involved that development was denied. Your presence this evening, the issues that you have raised, have given me courage and encouraged me to follow the reason that I came here, which was the neighborhoods are important, their integrity is important, and the people who live there are important. And so I'm going to join Andy in this motion, and for the same reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Further comments on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Michelle. Thanks, everyone, for showing up this evening. We're going to go ahead and allow folks to filter out before we move on to item 7A. We'll go ahead and move on to item 7A of our agenda, and this is a consideration of a request from Bob and Lisa Bailey for a Whitefish Lakeshore variance for a dynamic gravel beach in front of a replacement retaining wall and standard permit for repair of a stone patio and stairs, and the project's located at 300 Skiles Place. Bailey.
Great, well, you took most of my intro, so, as the mayor stated, this is a project at 300 Skiles Place. They are requesting a minor variance to replace an existing masonry block retaining wall with a dry stack stone wall, but install beach gravel in front of the wall in lieu of riprap. And then a standard permit to repair the existing dry set stone patio and steps that are failing due to the retaining wall. So the retaining wall was originally constructed prior to the lakeshore regulations. However, in 2002, a permit was approved to face the wall with stone in an attempt to bring the wall into compliance with the regulations at that time. The current wall is failing. It is creating a significant safety hazard at the house. The lakeward tilt of the wall indicates it does not have adequate footings or reinforcements behind it. There is no evidence of toe scouring, which is undermining the wall from the front part with the waves. At the base of the wall, it's been determined that it's failing due to the lack of proper drainage that's behind the wall and the result of the frost heave and water kind of seeping through that. So the applicant is requesting a variance to, there's 3 sections of the lakeshore regulations, in order to complete the project. The first one is that riprap is supposed to be placed within 6 inches of the top of the wall. And I'll explain these more in detail later. The second one is regarding the size of the fill material for the beach. Our regulations permit 3/4 inch to 1.5 inch is the standard size. So they're asking for a deviation from the size. And then the maximum fill depth of fill, we only, our current regulations say between 4 and 6 inches. So they're asking to deviate from the depth of that fill material as well. The lakeshore regulations do permit retaining walls to be replaced in the same location and the height of the existing walls, but the new wall is supposed to be brought into compliance with the current regulations. And obviously they're asking for a variance for those standards. So instead of riprap, the applicant is proposing the placement of beach gravel in front of the replaced wall. The volume of the beach gravel is proposed at 9.6 cubic yards, which is keeping with the allowable quantity of material that would be under the one-time gravel application. So they're not asking for more than what a normal application for beach gravel would be. They have been working with Dr. Mark Lorang from the Freshwater Map, Inc. to create a dynamic gravel beach. The proposal would place gravel below the high water elevation, but above the low water elevation. So I want to make that clear. They're not putting it into the lake. They're putting it kind of in that kind of almost, I feel like, no man land kind of in between. And they would be creating a gravel groin on the west side of the masonry wall. And the groin would be comprised of a 6 to 8 inch deep layer of 3/4 inch to 2 inch washed rock. And then on top of that, they would do pea gravel, so smaller than the 3/4 inch, another 2 to 6 inches on top of that to match the existing gravel beach. And so the purpose of the groin would be to cause the waves to break and dissipate that energy to mitigate the transfer of the materials that we've been seeing. And then the second activity is they're proposing to repair the existing dry set stone patio and steps that have slumped due to the failing retaining wall. The patio and stairs are approximately 236 square feet. They would be using the same materials and amount of materials utilized in the repair. It would not be added to or enlarged, so they wouldn't be expanding that impervious surface. And then following the repair, the area would be revegetated in compliance with the lakeshore regulations. So the property has 77 feet of lakeshore frontage. It's eligible for 616 square feet of constructed area. There is an existing dock on the property that was approved in 2002. And then I mentioned in 2002, they also got a second permit to face the existing wall with the stone steps, trying to bring it more into conformance. And they also did the stone patio at that time. And at that time, the lakeshore regulations did not count the constructed area of the stone patio into the total calculations of the property. That came at a later date. And so the total amount of constructed area currently on the property is over the eligible amount by 21 square feet, but it's basically considered grandfathered or legal non-conforming with regards to that constructed area. So I just want to make that known. In reviewing a minor variance application, there's 4 criteria that have to be reviewed in order for a project to be considered for approval. One is the unusual circumstances of the property. It does have a unique shape in regards to its location of its northern boundary line. Oh, and I'm glad Michelle put up the site plan. It was originally part of a larger tract created in the early 1900s when Whitefish was just being started. However, over time, the parcel has been divided and moved, and boundary lines moved into many lots. So as of 1986, the last remains of the original lot configuration were abandoned with a boundary line adjustment. So under our current standards, the riparian boundary line would be a projection of the property line where it makes a right angle with the shoreline. So that kind of, that northern property line gets off. If the applicant was required to install riprap along the toe of their retaining wall, they would lose approximately 90% of their beach area, and actually it would push the riprap onto the neighboring property. They would actually be going over the property line to comply with our regulations on that northern, northern east portion of it. And then additionally, riprap is a reflective material. And if you remember, Dr. Lorraine came out in January of this year and did the presentation on that and on the concept of these dynamic beach gravel applications. And so they have been working with him to try to show this and use this almost like a pilot project to kind of show what could happen with that. And they did include a supplemental design report that has way more scientific figures and numbers than I could ever try to explain. But they do have that scientific rationale of why they're asking for the depth they're asking, why they're asking for the amount, and how they're going to do that. And so they did submit that as part of their application as well. There are no reasonable alternatives that would comply with the standards and maintain the property as it is today. The project would not materially diminish water quality, fish or wildlife habitat, create a public nuisance or safety hazard. They're not altering the potential visual impacts from the subject property, and many people feel riprap isn't really natural either, so they're trying to make it look more of what a natural beach should look like is the idea and the concept behind that. And then they're trying to bring the property again into compliance with current standards. So trying to get some of that failing wall out of there and more in line with our dry stack stone standards that we have currently as well. General benefits from the variance include minimizing any further degradation of the failing wall, which could potentially contaminate the lake, and then visual impacts by replacing the previous concrete wall with the dry stack stone in compliance with our current regulations. And then the idea of the beach gravel would allow for the trying to reverse our decades-long problem of the wave action and the inappropriate materials. So staff did recommend approval of the minor variance and the standard lakeshore permit, subject to 25 conditions of approval. It did go before the Lakeshore Protection Committee on July 10th. They considered and asked a lot of questions. There were no other members of the public at the July 10th meeting, and I did include those draft minutes as part of your packet. And then following the staff's presentation and public comment, the Lakeshore Committee did vote to recommend approval of the application unanimously. And so I do have Kurt is the applicant's representative. He's here this evening to answer any questions, but I'm happy to answer what I can as well. So,
Thanks, Bailey. Any questions for Bailey? Or Kurt's here as well, if you'd rather direct your questions to Kurt. Any questions for Bailey?
Those groins are underwater, is that right?
It'd be between the high and the low. So generally speaking, I mean, obviously as the lowest of the low, it would be out of the water, and as the water moves up to high water, then it would end up being underwater, from my understanding.
And so that's represented by that heavy dashed line?
I'll let maybe Kurt, I'll let Kurt look at that, yeah.
Kurt Baumfeld, 427 East Center Street. Two minor clarifications. Sorry, not to correct you, Bailey. There might have been an old bit of text that's been changed in my application for the size of the material, so that was no longer part of the variance request. So the material that we're proposing to install is still within the allowable size requirements of the current lakeshore regulations. And then the second minor clarification is the groin that is being proposed below the high water mark That's being processed under a 310 permit with the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm still waiting to hear back from them on that. But those two pieces of the project can stand alone. So if we don't get the Army Corps permit, it doesn't detrimentally affect what we want to do to the rest of the site. To answer your question, Richard, the groin is only being proposed about 8 feet or so beyond high water mark, and it's really just in the area where there's exposed tree roots. There's some cottonwood trees, and
Speaking to the microphone.
Sorry.
Hey, you
Yes.
can't hear you.
Yep. So this is the area that we're proposing the groin, and it's the reason for that is because the neighboring adjacent property has a masonry retaining wall that is reflecting the wave action onto my client's property, and the predominant movement of gravels is from a west to northeasterly direction, and the oceanographer Mark Lorang has determined that the reason for this movement of gravel is because of the reflective materials on the adjacent property. And so the point of the groin is to try to remedy that and to fill in some of that low area so that it would benefit both properties over time. The whole idea is that the gravels are allowed to move freely and buffer the base of the wall from the wave action. And the only area that we saw any tow scour was right at the property line, which is where we're proposing the groin. So the rest of the length of the retaining wall has no evidence of tow scour whatsoever from wave action. And that was also backed up by some wave calculations and studies that Mark Lorang helped us with.
Would this have a positive, negative, or neutral effect on the next neighbor to the left, whatever direction that is, south?
It would have a positive effect, yes.
A positive, not increased tow scour or anything?
No, because what the beach gravel is specifically designed to absorb the impact of the waves, whereas the current riprap requirements, that's a reflective material. So all that does is bounce the wave energy to the adjacent properties, and that is what's causing this problem on that property line. So the gravel over time would start to displace and fill in some of that tow scour on the neighboring property as well. But it's really a very minimal amount of gravel that we're proposing in that area. So,
thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Kurt. Any additional questions for the applicant's representative? I have a couple comments, and then we will need a motion for the variance request. First of all, I want to thank the applicants and your team for actually bringing forward this pilot project. I think it's the direction that came from the city council in an attempt to reduce the frequency of riprap installations we see around the lakeshore. So very much thank you for bringing this forward. With that said, I'm very curious in the effectiveness of this treatment, since it will be the first application on Whitefish Lake, and I have a lot of faith and confidence in Mark and your team. Would Mark and the applicant be okay with a condition, if the council's okay with this, that we include an effectiveness monitoring plan be implemented to evaluate how effective this alternative technique is in maintaining, beach gravels, beach morphology, wave action dissipation, et cetera? And I would defer to Mark to develop that sampling plan. I'm not going to dictate what that would look like, but maybe he could work with staff and get something in the hopper for maybe, an as-built survey, and perhaps after a major storm event, a resurvey to document, how things have changed or not changed. I think that would be pretty valuable as we move towards
certainly.
amending our lakeshore regulations.
Mark and I have discussed that.
Okay.
So that is, yes.
So would this be ongoing for a number of years? And if so, then we should probably establish the number of years.
We could do that. I mean, the core requirements.
Or you could do that and say,
Yeah.
here's what we intend to do.
I can discuss that with Mark and see what the appropriate time period is and the frequency.
Yeah. And I'm not asking for an exhaustive PhD
Okay.
research project here, but just, a general, baseline, as-built condition survey, and then following a major storm event, resurvey, photo points, documentation, perhaps a resurvey and a comparison to the as-built condition.
I know that I wouldn't object and Mark wouldn't object. I can't speak right at the moment to my client and how onerous the cost of that might be, but
Well, we'll see if we
I can
get that
present
as an
that to
added
them
condition.
yeah.
We'll see if we get that as an
Okay, I
added
can definitely
condition
present
if
that to
we
my
have a
client.
motion.
Yeah, I don't know what that would come to.
It's
My-
just a master's thesis, not a PhD.
My clients graciously
Sure.
spent a lot of money, and it's been a long process, so I don't know if he's at his point of exhaustion with the
Well,
expense of this,
I'll
but
further my comment here. What was the permit fee on this project, on this application?
$490, I believe, with the variance in this one activity, I believe, yeah.
I would go as far as to say if it's in the city's best interest to, if we're endorsing this technique and we want to see how effective it indeed is, I'm not asking to waive the permit, but perhaps our contribution could be a reimbursement of the permit fee to help offset the cost of monitoring. And those are my comments on this particular application. I'll let the council digest those and formulate your own opinion on a motion and or a condition as well. Richard.
Sure, you want a motion?
Yes, please.
I'll go ahead and move to approve the request from Bob and Lisa Bailey. Any relation? No. For a Whitefish Lakeshore variance, dynamic gravel beach in front of replacing the retaining wall and standard permit for repair of stone patio stairs located at 300 Skiles Place. And if I get a second, I'll have a friendly.
Thanks,
Or
Richard. Is there a
somebody
second
else
to the
might.
motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hennon. Richard.
That the applicant will provide the city with an effectiveness monitoring and sampling report to follow the installation of the said retaining wall and gravel and be in effect for a period not to exceed 5 years.
Is there a second to the friendly amendment? Before there's a second, I would just suggest that we allow Mark and his team to dictate the sampling frequency. I think they're the professionals. I'd rather not dictate that from the dais.
Okay, so that, I guess I was good until I got to the 5 years. At the discretion of the consultant and the landowner.
Great. Is there a second to the friendly amendment?
I'll second that one.
Seconded by Councilor Fury. We will vote first on the friendly amendment. Comments? Frank?
On the friendly amendment?
Sure.
Richard, it seemed to me, given the commitment that this homeowner has made to this process, doing what we want him to do, I would concur with the mayor's suggestion that we be willing to, for lack of a better description, subsidize that report or that series of reports to the extent of their application fee. I think that's only fair. One of the things that we're doing here is we're trying to get information for the city for the future in what we could and should be requiring and how effective it is. And I think it would be, we want this information anyway. I just think it would be appropriate.
That's fine.
Is that okay with the second? Implied that we'll basically reimburse the permit fee to go towards the effectiveness monitoring. Up to the permit fee amount to help offset or subsidize the monitoring requirement. Any further comments on the friendly amendment? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, which brings us back to the original motion for approval. Further discussion? Andy?
Yeah, just a couple quick comments. Yeah, I'm super excited to see this happen. And I think if it does work and we find out that it's something that we want to go through more applications in the future, we're going to want to obviously look at our lakeshore rigs and not have to have this come through as a variance, hopefully. And that's kind of one of our purposes of looking at it from a monitoring standpoint. And as someone who's lived on the lake for a very long time and looking at my very smashed finger here from moving my dock on Friday night and getting it caught in the chain because there's so much wave action on the lake now, it's not just from weather.
Sure,
It's from boats, and that's only gonna get worse, and I can't even describe how much it's changed. And we're gonna see more and more of this type of erosion, I'm afraid, on the lake, and I think we're gonna have to find some reasonable solutions for it, because we don't want a lake that looks like a bathtub or a hot tub, so.
Well stated. Further discussion or comments? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Michelle, thanks for coming up tonight, Kurt.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
We will move on to item 8A, which is Resolution 19-16, a resolution to authorize the one-time use of Smith Fields for the Great Northwest Oktoberfest. And I know Katie has something to add.
I will just like to state for the record, I am going to recuse myself from this vote as I have stake through my job. I provide and sell beers, so I don't think I should vote on this.
Thanks, Katie. I would acknowledge Kevin Gartland with the Chambers in the audience, as is Don Beckwith, which I assume you're with Project Whitefish Kids this evening. So if you have any specific questions for Kevin, otherwise, Angie.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My report begins on page 263 of the packet. So back in 2004, Project Whitefish Kids transferred approximately 57 acres of land known as Smith Fields to the city. The city then leased Smith Fields back to PWK for use as a youth athletic facility. Sorry, that was hard. The 2004 lease allows PWK exclusive use of Smith Fields, and it also allows them the right to limit, control, and schedule the use of the fields to best run as a youth athletic facility. It also prohibits any alcohol from being sold or served at Smith Fields, and it requires PWK to enforce that prohibition. So as you're all aware, the Chamber has traditionally held Oktoberfest at Depot Park in the fall. They will be unable to do so this year because of planned construction. So the Chamber approached PWK about holding this year's Oktoberfest at Smith Fields. And in recognition of the many years of support from the downtown businesses in the Chamber, PWK agreed to allow them to do that this year. They did want to make sure that the city wouldn't consider this a breach of their lease agreement, and kind of wanted the city's buy-in as well because it's still a city park. So the proposed resolution authorizes the 2019 Oktoberfest to be held at Smith Fields, and also waives any claim that the city may have that PWK is in default by allowing alcohol at this event. So there's no financial requirements or impacts of the proposed resolution, and staff does recommend that the city council adopt the resolution and allow the Chamber to have Oktoberfest in Smith Fields for 2019.
Thanks, Angie. Any questions for Angie on her staff report? Not seeing any, we will need a motion to approve Resolution 19-16. Richard?
I have some questions first.
Okay.
First of all, I'm assuming that the location for the venue will not conflict with soccer, and it'll be on the baseball side rather than the soccer side of the complex. And secondly, will there be any financial remuneration from the Chamber to PWK to offset expenses, mowing, all those things? In other words, or is this just going to be a handshake deal? So whoever wants to step up and answer those questions, I'd be happy to hear them, the answers.
Thanks, Donna. Just name and address for the record, please.
John Bestwick, 273 Sawtooth, Whitefish. It's hard to remember your own address. As far as the venue, it'll be held on the baseball side, the east side of the park. Soccer all takes place on the west side. And there are 3 entrances to the park. One is at the baseball end, one is a fire entrance between the soccer and the baseball venue, and then at the west end of the park is the soccer entrance. So we'll have separate entrances. There will be one high school soccer game on one of the Saturdays. I can't remember if it's the first or second Saturday. but that will pretty much be over with before the Oktoberfest gets their festivities going on the weekend. So Kevin has done a lot of work with kind of traffic control and all of that kind of stuff. So there's going to be minimal impact with soccer and the event. And all the parking will be on the baseball end of the facility.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
That's one of them. The other one was who gets the money? Or is there any money?
Good evening.
Hey, Kevin.
How you all doing? First, I just want to thank the folks from Project Whitefish Kids for being open to this proposal on our behalf. We have looked at no less than a dozen different locations to move this event this year, all of which have, well, not all of which have high points. A lot more of them have low points that kind of preclude you from doing that. Things you might think, places you might think are perfect for this. To address your question, we proposed to Project Whitefish Kids that we pay them a fee for rental of the facility, for use of the facility, roughly equal to what we usually pay the city in terms of our permit fees for using Depot Park and closing down the streets, in the neighborhood of $1,500, actually exactly $1,500. And in addition to that, we've offered PWK and the various youth groups who use the facility. One of the things we do is our bars are operated by nonprofit groups who keep the tips at Oktoberfest, and so we've offered them the opportunity to staff as many of those shifts as they would like to staff, because I know that fundraising is a 365-day-a-year job for these folks. So we're trying to get show them a little bit of benefit, a little bit of fundraising opportunity there, and we're also encouraging them to use the opportunity when we have 7,500 people, hopefully, come through again this year, to use that to promote themselves, to promote what they've been doing out there for many, many years, and creating a great service. So we're hoping that it can work to both of our benefits, the best of a less than perfect situation.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Kevin. Further questions for Don, Kevin, or Angie for that matter? We will need a motion to approve Resolution 19-16. Ryan?
I would move to approve Resolution 19-16, a resolution to authorize the one-time use of Smith Fields for the Great Northwest Oktoberfest.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Hartman. Further discussion or comments on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously with Councilor Williams abstaining from the discussion and the vote. Thanks very much. Yep, good luck with the event. Yep. We'll move on to item 9A. You have Adam's report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Adam on his reports this evening? Adam, anything to report on? Not included in your report.
Yes. So, the Department of Revenue has delivered us the budget, the new taxable numbers. And it has left Dana and I reeling. So, picture this. We're coming down out of the we're just entering the Great Recession. So 2008, 9, 10, we still had some development that kind of cleared up. And then 2011 took a huge hit and dropped us all the way. Now this is taxable value, so it's a smaller segment of what the actual market value is, but left us with $575,000 in newly taxable value. And so that should be the low point we've ever had. But this year they gave us $375,000. So $200,000 less. And we have been having essentially banner years as far as growth and everything is concerned. Last year we had $933,000 in new growth. And this year when they're doing a reassessment, they decide to hit us with 60% less than that at $375,000. So that means that we are gonna have to work with the Department of Revenue to figure out where where things went awry. It's probably going to take us longer than 2 weeks, and as you know, we're going to approve the budget at the next meeting. So we're probably going to, I know Dana and I have already brainstormed a few options. We might have to get a little creative in how we do things for this one budget cycle. I think some of what we're going to see is a difference in the growth that we saw in the TIF versus the growth we saw out of the TIF. Now, Dana had predicted 10% growth, and she always does conservative numbers, of 10% in the TIF, and we had like 11.5%. So the TIF did as projected, everything else did not. So she projected 8% growth, and we're down around 6%. So we're gonna have to get really creative on a few things in order to continue with the services we wanna do. Now, as you know, the TIF is gonna end next year, and so that whole debacle of in and out is gonna end next year. So we think we might be able to, we might have to do a one-time fix, and so we'll make sure to have a good staff report for the next meeting so you know exactly what it is we're gonna do and how it's gonna be overcome in the next year. And then we're gonna continue to work with the Department of Revenue because we think there are some errors there. Anytime you drop from 933,000 to 375, which is the second lowest year we've had since 2011, something is off. So we're gonna try to figure out what that is. So just wanted to let you know the great news.
Suggestion, you mentioned we're gonna have to be creative on a few things. We've been here before. What do we have on the docket for our work session on the 19th?
2 interviews?
2 interviews. I think if the council's supportive, let's go ahead and schedule a work session to get an update on
Perfect.
the FY20 budget, if that's okay with you,
Yep, that
rather than
works
try
great.
to digest that information outside of a work session or here, up here at the dais.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. Any questions or comments on this subject? Not seeing any. Anything else, Adam?
That's all I have.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to item 10A. We did receive a letter from Kamisha regarding the intersection at East 3rd Street and Summers Avenue. Appreciate Craig's response. It's enclosed in the packet. He also emailed that out a few days ago. Any comments on Kamisha's letter or Craig's response? I guess just having lived at that intersection for 11 plus years, I wish I still owned my house there. The bulk of the traffic, and I know things change, but it certainly was that east-west, 3rd Street section of the intersection. I mean, that's where the traffic was cranking, that's where the high speeds were occurring, and I think we've adequately addressed that through the Summers Avenue reconstruction project for what it's worth. Anything else to add on that, Craig? No, okay. We'll move on to stay with item 10, and we'll start tonight with communications from the council. And why don't we start with Melissa tonight?
Well, when we had our retreat, one of the items that came up was the idea of creating a mission statement for the city. And I believe it was Andy's idea. And I think we responded pretty positively to that. And so I'm just wondering if there's a way to potentially move that forward and engage the community as well in creating a mission state for the city of Whitefish, and something that we can use as a guiding principle when we're making decisions and helps clarify our goals and the goals of the city. So I don't know if that, what the first steps would be in regard to that, or whether it requires first a work session, or do we set up something for the public to participate in, kind of like a charrette type of situation, or?
Adam?
It's the first time hearing about it, but we can certainly set up something. Typically speaking, mission statements are important, but they tend to be a little more simple. I don't know how many resources you want to put to try to address a mission statement in the city of Whitefish. It is certainly something staff can take a crack at, and we can have a discussion, a work session, and we can do a good job of advertising that. And then people can come to the work session, it can be discussed, debated, public comment can be had, and then it can just be approved through a normal resolution process probably. I think that would probably be the easiest, least expensive way to go to arrive at something.
I would suggest we take it off staff's back.
Okay.
And put it on our backs because we're the ones that want to develop this guiding principle or mission statement, and that with all due respect.
Yeah, absolutely, that'd be fine.
Perhaps there's a couple counselors that want to volunteer to work with Melissa on drafting something that we can start kicking around, via email. It's not a quasi judicial issue, it's administrative, something we can put our eyes on and make edits. And then when we feel we have something that is deliverable to Adam and staff, perhaps then we can schedule that work session, if that's okay with you, Melissa?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to volunteer to?
That'll be Craig. I mean, that'll be great. I was just going to assign it to Craig anyway, so.
Oh, perfect.
So he'll be grateful.
Any volunteers to work with Melissa on a first crack at that? Andy, okay?
All right.
Thanks, Melissa.
Sure. Thank you.
Frank?
Oh, I'd be happy, if you need more people, I'd be happy to
Okay, great.
play anyway.
Any comments this evening?
Yeah. Tonight was a treasure trove of public comment on several.
Frank, you.
I'm sorry. I'm plugged in. I was there. There was a treasure trove this evening of public comment. I'd like to go back to ask some questions that Jan Metzmaker asked, in particular at the quarry. Bike path, I know it's finally been finished. Craig, for lack of a better description, what the hell was going on and why didn't we have better control of what was going on over there that created the problem that it did with people in the street? I mean, this is nuts.
Yeah, we did allow the developer to close the bike path for a short period while they were constructing the bus stop. They just didn't get it done. So they basically went in, they tore it all up under a permit. We gave them a permit to close the bike path for a temporary period, and then they poured the concrete, they never came back to finish it, as much as I worked on them and other staff did. And so personally, I feel like I dropped the ball. They should have gotten a stop work order days after the bike path was closed, and they didn't show up. And so I learned a lesson, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. My question is, because we've had these kinds of issues come up before. What my observation is that unless there is a financial penalty or disincentive to screw up, they'll screw up. And they did in this case. Do we need to consider or enact some kind of ordinance or requirement that when they're going to do things like this, and they've been given a permit and a timeline that they have to live with, and they don't make it, that they are penalized accordingly? Do we have such a facility now? And if not, do we need to enact one?
I think the financial penalty really would have been that stop work order. Telling those guys no other work happens until this is done, that would have gotten their attention. And when I finally did it last Friday, it got done that day.
Okay.
Now, yeah, there are penalties, and there is a procedure set forth in the code for violations of permits, and so we could have followed that track as well. But honestly, in a project like that, you just want to get it done, and you want to get the path back open. You don't want to.
No, I concur.
Collect money from it. So.
Right. Okay. Following up on the same issue, and this may be Dave in building as well. What about the dust and dirt issue? I mean, I raised this issue privately with somebody. It's like, what are we doing out there to require that they clean up the roads, that they minimize the dust exposure out there? What are we doing? What can we do?
Yeah, that's an erosion control issue. They do have an erosion control permit, and they are supposed to be mitigating dust on a daily basis. I know they have a water truck out there. Water only works for, this time of year, a couple hours. So they need to start using other products, and we'll make sure that happens. I haven't noticed the dust in the last couple weeks. When they first started the project, there was a pretty significant dust problem, but we haven't had complaints in the last month or so, but hearing that there are complaints, we'll make sure we get on top of that.
Okay. The weed problem.
Yeah, so on to Summers Avenue, I assume. We are working with the contractor. There is a warranty for the restoration that was done along the boulevards. We've directed the contractor, which is Sandry Construction, to have all of the boulevards mowed and sprayed, and then we'll be spreading additional topsoil and overseeding this fall. So we have been monitoring that. The folks that are mowing their boulevards, it's actually turning out pretty well, but there's a number of properties that aren't doing any maintenance, and that's where, you know, the weeds are really flourishing. So the folks that have been out there maintaining it and making sure that they mow it before it goes to seed, things are looking pretty good. But we do in the contract have a requirement for the contractor to abate weeds for up to 2 years. So we're working on that.
My second weed problem. Maria, do we need to tighten the weed ordinance to deal with the issue of eradication?
Part of things. I mean, that's something that when we, adopted that ordinance back in the day, that we chose mowing as a potential option, mostly because the use of, herbicides is controversial. And as long as people keep it mowed, they do eventually die out, but it doesn't completely kill them. So it's certain types of weed doesn't necessarily affect that, but that's, it's a policy call to try to minimize the use of herbicides. That's how our ordinance is written right now. I mean, if you guys, want to change it, then we would be requiring people to, poison them. But right now, I mean, the majority of the abatement is mowing that people do.
But it appears to me they're not doing it.
Well, certain cases, there's a ton of weed growth all over the city.
Right.
As soon as we get a complaint or we see it, we send them letters. If they don't abate it, then there's a process where we give them time to do it. If not, then we hire a contractor to go do it, and we bill them, and it goes on their taxes. And so I don't know what, as far as the quarry goes, where they're at in the process. I know that Major has been in touch with them about it. I just don't, I'm just a ton of them going on at any given time. I just don't know where that one is in the process. But.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further, Frank?
Nothing this evening.
Thanks. Katie?
No, Frank covered it all.
Thanks, Katie. Ryan?
Nothing.
Thanks, Ryan. Andy?
Just one thing, as long as we're talking about the Department of Transportation a bunch tonight, I just wonder if there's any appetite for sending a letter to the Department of Transportation regarding medians on Highway 93 South. I realize we're in the process of going through the corridor plan, but they have admitted that we've met the traffic volumes necessary to require them to put medians in. And knowing the glacial pace at which they tend to move and get projects forwarded, I think the sooner we start hammering them with some letters, the better. So if there's some appetite for that, I would like to see us send a letter and say, we'd like our medians now.
Everyone interested in seeing that letter drafted?
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
Go.
That's it.
Something that, Craig, you can work on with Dave, perhaps, or?
We can work on putting together a letter. There is a new regional director, Ed Taves has stepped down, and so we'll be writing it to I think he's the interim regional director, but it's a gentleman we've met before at meetings, and we can put something together, definitely.
Great.
And I do have one last thing. I seem to be the person that does this just because I've been up here long. I just want to acknowledge Scott Sorensen's passing this weekend. Longtime planning board member, Board of Adjustments, served the city, volunteered a lot and contributed a bunch over the years. And I just want to reach out and say, we're thinking about Joni and his 2 sons, so.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah,
Richard?
thanks, Andy. A couple of things. One, in that discussion on weeds, abatement/eradication is plant-specific, and for some plants, mowing is the preferred alternative. Other plants require a different treatment, and I think that we could, in fact, start looking at some adjustments to our code that require the appropriate abatement or eradication as per the prescriptions that are out there both from the federal and state level. So I think there's some things we can do to actually tighten up that weed ordinance to make it more effective, rather than just say mowing is good enough for all classes of weeds. I talked to Bridger a little bit about this the other day, on Friday, and that the incidents and the increased traffic has encouraged people to pass on the right when somebody is trying to make a left-hand turn. I don't know if it's possible to increase our enforcement there. There's going to be some people who are a little upset when all of a sudden, this is the way I've always done it. But I just see that, as Scott Countryman was pointing out, it's those left-hand turns that you can't see. The post office is one of them. As people walk back and forth from the post office to downtown and somebody's making a left turn onto 4th, or even a right turn onto Baker, there's that conflict in the crosswalks. And so just an awareness thing. And
we can do that.
Okay, thanks. I'm getting a little tired of the balloons on Alta Vista every day that the helium goes out of them. All of a sudden, they reappear again. Can we do anything to take a pin to those balloons?
Richard, actually, Johnson, I think at the beginning of last week.
Last Friday.
Last Friday. So just to give you a little update, when all those sandwich boards were out, our direction to Major was go take them down. And he did, and Mark Panasini basically told him, well, I'm just going to put him back on the weekend because I know you don't have a code enforcement officer. I actually drove by there that same weekend, John did, and saw it and should have taken pictures. I didn't. My prosecutor has sent him a letter that basically says the next time you do it, we will be charging you civilly.
Okay.
So, yeah, just getting compliance has been really difficult. Majors had several conversations, had sent him letters. I had a telephone conversation with him after Major went out there. So we're trying, but that's our next step.
Can I just take my own pin? No, I won't do that.
Just an FYI, the balloons were flying again on Sunday when Andy and I drove by.
Were they?
Just an FYI, yesterday.
I think I saw him today, but I'd have to. But if we think we have a traffic problem on Baker Avenue, I came out of Glacier National Park at 11 o'clock this morning. Coming into Glacier National Park, all 3 entrance lanes were operating, and the traffic was backed up from the west entrance all the way through West Glacier, around the corner, and a quarter of a mile west on Highway 2. It was unreal. So Baker ain't that bad.
Holy cow.
It was, I'd never seen it like that. And they were trying to flag them through as fast as they could get them. I don't know where they're going. Parking lots are all full.
Not far. Anything further?
No, that's enough.
Thanks, Richard. I've got a couple items, and I've informed staff of this first item, and in fact, they're going to take and run with it from here. But I did get a call from Matt Jones, the former Public Relations Director for BNSF, who put me in contact with Maya and Mark, who's with the BNSF Environmental Remediation Division. I sent an email to the council today just updating you on this, but there was a complaint, citizen complaint filed to BNSF last week regarding an observed sheen on the river just below the roundhouse where we have our, public non-motorized boat launch. It measured about 20 feet in length. BNSF did send an investigative team out, and they agitated the sediments in the river and basically inspected the interceptor trench as well as the piezometers. And by all accounts, all of the mitigations are functioning, but the sheen is existing, and it's about 15 feet offshore from our public access point. They followed up on Saturday with and pressure washed the actual river bottom. They used a jet to basically see if they could surpass where the sheen was, emanating from and kind of characterize the extent of it. And it was still sheening, despite their efforts to get below to that clay layer. So they called me and informed me that their next step, they're going to deploy an excavator, a small excavator, and put out, the appropriate BMPs and booms, and basically take the excavator out in the river and basically excavate and try to further investigate and characterize where this sheen is. And it's petroleum, is coming from. They expect that it's probably coming from an upland area, meaning an area between the roundhouse and the shoreline of the river, and that perhaps the synthetic clay liner that they have in place to intercept any residual petroleum's perhaps not functioning. So I indicated to them that given the high public use on the river segment, it probably wouldn't make a lot of sense for them to run out tomorrow morning with an excavator without properly notifying the city or the public of their emergency actions. And so I think they're holding off for a couple days. They are going to send public release statements out to the Interlake and the pilot, and I put them in touch with city staff to hopefully, get the word out that people aren't too alarmed when they see an excavator down in the river in the cleanup area that we spent a lot of time and energy on a number of years ago. So I just wanted to give council an update on that, and I anticipate staff or myself we'll probably hear back from BNSF in the next couple of days, and we'll keep you apprised as to their progress there. There was an interesting comment tonight, I think it was from one of the individuals that spoke against the Skiles Avenue project regarding a pedestrian-activated signal or a need for it at the Ice Den crossing. I think that's a great idea. I consistently go down to Alpine Market, and traffic doesn't typically stop for people that are trying to use that crosswalk. And it's a pretty well-used, crossing given the proximity to the Ice Den and, the neighborhoods to the east. And so I was just curious if we could maybe look at that crossing, Craig, in particular, and see if it makes sense to put in a pedestrian-activated crossing at that location.
Yeah, I know that's been on the list of requests we've had from MDT.
You have, okay.
Again, it's their right-of-way, so we can't just go throw signals up, but I'll bring it up again with them.
Okay, I appreciate that. Where are we with, and I think this was Andy and Frank, I believe you guys were appointed to like the fireworks working group. Where are we with those text amendments? Maybe staff can chime in here.
Yeah, I can. We actually met and I think agreed on some language. I sent it out. We need to meet again and make sure what I drafted is what we actually agreed on.
Okay, it's still in the hopper though, and we're making progress there? Okay, thanks, Angie. Finally, there's been a lot of reference to the big duplex that went up across from Pam Barbaros's house up on the hill. I think many folks from the public have commented on that in recent months, and it's my understanding that one of the reasons they were able to maximize the footprint of that duplex or townhomes, whatever they are, is because they were allowed to basically put up structural, supports or retaining walls within the setback on that particular property. And if anyone looks at the mass and scale of that duplex, it is massive, and it dwarfs the adjacent residences. And from my perspective, it certainly it's not neighborhood compatible. And I think Andy and I have talked about this extensively. If you haven't looked at it, you should go take a look. But I know it's something I want to at least look at, Dave, and I've talked to you about this, is what our code says regarding structural improvements within a yard setback to maximize a building envelope or footprint. And I just wouldn't mind if maybe on the next agenda we could have that language presented in our packet and just have a discussion on that particular piece of the code, if I have the support of the council. I just would like to have a better understanding of what it reads and what it means in terms of building opportunity and potential.
I concur.
Yeah, we have kind of minimal retaining wall standards where they can't be over a certain height, and and how our retaining wall is defined, so we can bring that language in and you can take a look at that.
Do you think that warrants an agenda item from the council's perspective, or maybe if we have 15 minutes?
Something that we're going to have to probably bring Tad in on, because it's when we're talking about structural and buildings, so we would have to make sure he's available. But
Perhaps the best avenue would be if we have a 15-minute, 30-minute gap at a work session, just get it on the agenda, if that's okay with council, and start there. It might not be anything we need to necessarily address, but I just want to have a better understanding of how that reads. Is that okay with council?
Yes, and I think we need to address it. I think it's proven to be a problem. We can, bad facts make bad law.
Yep.
But they demonstrate a need.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's all I had. Anything further from staff tonight? How about the council? We are adjourned. Thanks. We're not adjourned. Richard.
Today is the 70th anniversary of the Man Gulch Fire outside of Helena.
Wow.
For those interested in Montana history.
It's a great book.
Is it?
Young Men in Fire.
Thanks. We're adjourned.
Norman McLean, Young Men in Fire.
Never read it.
It's a good book.